Hi guys, and welcome to Relaxation Bedtime History. Tonight we climb a steep chalk ridge above the English Channel and make our way toward one of the most formidable fortresses in medieval England, Dover Castle. In the uneasy year of 1216, the wind comes first. It pushes cold salt air against your face, tugs at your clothing, and carries the distant cries of seabirds from the cliffs below. Somewhere beyond the grey water lies France. Somewhere behind the enormous walls above you. Guards are watching the roads, servants are hauling supplies, horses are stamping in muddy yards, and somebody is probably complaining about dinner, and, just to set expectations, you probably won't survive this very comfortably. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is there. Perhaps you are beginning your evening while Dover's imaginary guards begin theirs. Now, dim the lights and place your feet on the road climbing toward the castle. It is not a gentle climb. The great fortress occupies high ground above Dover, and that position is precisely the point, long before you reach a gate. Your legs already understand something about medieval defensive architecture that a diagram never quite communicates. Heights make attackers tired. Your shoes press into a track churned by hooves, cartwheels, boots, and recent rain. The chalk beneath the soil sometimes shows pale through the mud. Ahead, wagons creep upward carrying barrels, sacks, bundles of firewood, and perhaps grain brought from the surrounding countryside. You move aside for one. The driver barely acknowledges you. His horse breathes heavily. The leather harness creaks, and one wooden wheel gives a repetitive squeal that sounds irritating enough to survive 8 centuries. Above you, walls rise against the sky. Dover is not simply a picturesque stone castle sitting politely on a hill. By 1216 it is a strategic fortress guarding one of England's most important approaches from the continent. The narrow stretch of sea between Dover and northern France makes this landscape exceptionally valuable. Ships, armies, messengers, merchants, and kings have good reason to pass nearby. That is the straightforward historical reality beneath everything you're about to see. Geography has made Dover important. Stone has made that importance visible. The enormous central keep dominating the complex was constructed during the reign of Henry II in the later 12th century. Even from outside, it has a severity that feels almost theatrical. Great blocks of stone form walls of intimidating thickness. Towers interrupt the skyline. Defensive earthworks and barriers force approaching people along routes that can be watched and controlled. No one simply wanders in. You continue upward. The smell changes as you approach human activity. Salt air mixes with wood smoke, horse manure, damp wool, leather, mud, and the faint aroma of cooking fires. Medieval castles are often imagined as clean silhouettes against sunsets, at ground level. They smell considerably more alive. A cluster of people waits ahead, a servant carrying baskets, 2 armed men, a priest whose cloak is catching the wind, a boy leading a small pack animal, a traveller with the unmistakable expression of someone who's been standing in the wrong queue for too long. Even fortresses apparently invent bureaucracy. The castle gates are points of protection, but they are also points of administration. Who are you? Why have you come? What are you carrying? Who expects you? In 1216, these questions have sharper edges than usual. England is caught in political crisis. King John has spent years struggling with rebellious barons, and the conflict has opened the door to intervention from across the Channel. Prince Louis of France, invited by opponents of John, has landed in England and is pressing his claim with military force. Dover therefore feels exposed. You might not yet hear the crash of siege engines or the shouting of an assault, but anxiety travels faster than armies. People know trouble is approaching. A guard looks down at you. Perhaps you're carrying supplies. That seems safer than claiming to be sightseeing. You pass inspection and move forward. The entrance does not offer a grand reveal. Instead, it gives you another barrier, another angle, another stretch of wall. Medieval defence is frustrating by design. Straight. Convenient access would also be convenient for enemies, which rather defeats the purpose. There is a peculiar little detail about castles like Dover that modern visitors sometimes miss. Their defensive spaces were not static museum pieces. Timber structures, fences, sheds, temporary barriers, workshops, animal pens, and storage areas could fill spaces that today appear impressively open. The castle you enter is cluttered and noisy. A hammer strikes metal somewhere beyond the wall. Dogs bark. A horse snorts. Someone shouts for a missing bundle. A chicken escapes the dignity expected of a royal fortress and races across the path. It is strangely reassuring. For all its massive architecture, Dover remains dependent on very ordinary things: food, water, fuel, hands, sleep, discipline, and luck. You pause near the outer defences and glance back. The view is magnificent. Below lies the settlement of Dover, and farther away, the sea stretches outward beneath a pale sky. On a clear day, the connection with France feels almost uncomfortably obvious. You begin to understand why this hill has attracted fortifications for centuries, yet exactly how every part of Dover's defences functioned at particular moments in 1216 is less certain than the surviving stone might suggest. Historians still argue whether some features traditionally connected with the famous siege were already developed in precisely the forms later sources and reconstructions imply. Medieval fortresses evolve, walls are rebuilt, entrances change, earthworks are deepened. Later improvements can blur earlier arrangements. The castle beneath your feet is therefore not frozen in time. It is a working place being continually adjusted to danger. A gust sweeps across the ridge. You pull your clothing tighter. Imagine standing guard here for hours. There is no insulated jacket, no thermal flask, and certainly no convenient little booth with a heater humming inside it. There is wool, perhaps a cloak, perhaps gloves if you are fortunate, and the consolation that everyone else is cold too. Another wagon arrives behind you. Its wheels crunch over stone. Men move toward it at once because almost everything entering the fortress must eventually be unloaded by somebody. And this begins to reveal the hidden life of Dover from a distance. The castle seems to belong to kings. Up close, it belongs just as much to labourers. The grandeur exists because people carry things. Stone is impressive, but stone does not cook supper. Walls can resist an army, but they cannot brush a horse, mend a cloak, fetch water, bake bread, empty waste, sharpen a blade, or keep a watch through freezing darkness. You follow the path deeper inside. The wind weakens slightly as walls rise around you, yet the sounds of human life grow stronger. Boots strike packed earth, buckets knock against wooden frames. A mule objects loudly to something nobody else can identify. You pass men hauling timber and servants carrying bundles toward buildings crowded against the defensive spaces. The castle is becoming less like a monument and more like a cramped town wearing armour. Ahead, another gateway draws you onward. Beyond it waits the outer ward, packed with the people, animals, tools, arguments, smells, and routines that make this gigantic fortress function. And as you join the slow stream moving toward it, the great keep watches from above, silent, square, and impossibly heavy against the evening sky. The passage opens into a space that feels much more crowded than the view from outside ever suggested. You step into the outer ward and immediately discover that a castle is not simply a collection of walls and towers. It is a working settlement pressed inside fortifications, with people moving in every direction, and almost no one appearing especially interested in your arrival. A cart rattles past carrying sacks of grain. 2 men wrestle a barrel toward a storehouse. A groom leads a nervous horse around a puddle. Someone is splitting firewood beside a low building, each strike of the axe producing a clean wooden crack that echoes briefly against the stone. The air is thick with smoke, damp earth, leather, animals, and cooking. You had perhaps imagined a broad courtyard where knights stride majestically beneath banners. There are knights, certainly. There are also chickens. The chickens seem less impressed by the architecture. They scratch beside a pile of straw while servants hurry past them carrying baskets, bundles, buckets, and tools. A dog noses hopefully around the edge of a kitchen yard, somewhere nearby. A pig makes a noise of deep personal dissatisfaction. This is the first important adjustment to your mental picture of medieval castles. Dover is a fortress, but it also has to function like a miniature town. By the early 13th century, major royal castles required large numbers of people to maintain them. Soldiers formed only part of the population. Clerks handled records and payments. Craftsmen repaired equipment. Grooms managed horses. Cooks prepared meals. Porters moved supplies. Servants cleaned rooms and carried fuel. Priests served chapels. Messengers arrived and departed, and all of them need to eat. That simple requirement explains much of the movement around you. A castle under threat cannot wait until everyone becomes hungry before thinking about provisions, grain, salted meat, dried peas, beans, ale, wine, cheese, fish, firewood, candles, fodder, and countless smaller necessities must be brought in, measured, stored, guarded, and eventually distributed. A clerk stands near one of the stores. He's checking deliveries. You watch a sack being opened while someone inspects the contents. Medieval administration may lack spreadsheets, but it does not lack suspicion. Royal castles generate paperwork. Accounts from medieval households frequently record astonishingly ordinary details: payments for bread, repairs, timber, nails, fodder, carts, candles, and wages survive precisely because powerful institutions depend on mundane expenses. History remembers kings. Account books remember onions. That may be one of the more charmingly inconvenient truths about studying the Middle Ages. You continue along the ward. The ground is uneven. Some areas are packed earth. Others are covered with gravel or rough stone. Rain gathers where drainage is poor, and traffic turns softer patches into mud. People adapt by placing boards, spreading straw, or simply accepting that clean footwear is an unrealistic ambition. Against sections of wall stand timber structures that would look temporary to modern eyes: sheds, lean-tos, work areas, storage spaces. These are essential. The stone parts of the castle dominate modern imagination because stone survives. Wood usually does not. Yet medieval fortified spaces could contain many timber buildings: partitions, shelters, stairs, fences, platforms, and outbuildings that vanish from the archaeological picture far more easily. So when you look across the ward, do not imagine empty lawns. Imagine clutter, a great deal of clutter. There are stacks of timber, bundles of arrows, baskets of charcoal, coils of rope, piles of straw, water containers, broken equipment awaiting repair, perhaps spare roofing materials, perhaps wheels from carts, perhaps objects whose purpose would take you several frustrating minutes to understand. Near one wall, a craftsman works at a bench. The precise trade is difficult to determine from a distance, but his tools suggest repair rather than decoration. In a fortress preparing for danger, maintaining equipment matters constantly. Leather straps snap, buckles bend, wooden shafts split, metal edges dull, harnesses wear through, doors need reinforcement, carts lose pins, buckets crack. Nothing remains useful forever simply because a king owns it. The idea that castles are full of permanent, indestructible objects is another illusion created by ruins. Daily medieval life is largely a war against things wearing out. You pass a pair of armed men talking quietly. Their clothing does not match perfectly. Neither does their equipment. That is normal. The defenders of a major fortress are not necessarily an army in identical uniforms. Retainers, knights, sergeants, crossbowmen, labourers, and temporary forces may arrive with different clothing, weapons, protective equipment, and levels of wealth. One man carries a shield whose surface shows scratches. Another has a padded garment beneath his equipment. A third nearby is checking the binding on a crossbow. The atmosphere feels busy rather than heroic. That is probably much closer to reality, even when danger is approaching. Most military preparation consists of repetitive tasks: count, carry, repair, sharpen, store, watch, repeat. One curious feature of castle life is that animals can be nearly as important to daily logistics as people. You notice this as another group of horses is led across the ward. Horses consume enormous amounts of fodder. They require water. They need grooming. Their hoofs and harnesses require attention. They become sick. They panic. They kick. They also produce substantial quantities of manure. A fact heroic chronicles rarely pause to celebrate. If a castle houses many mounted men, someone must constantly manage the animals that make mounted movement possible. You smell the stables before you reach them. Warm animal breath mixes with hay and dung. Inside, the light is dimmer. A groom checks a horse's leg while another man carries a bundle of fodder through the doorway. The animals shift in their stalls, producing soft thumps and scraping sounds. For a moment, the ward outside seems quieter. Then someone begins shouting again. You turn back toward the open space. An argument has started beside a cart. Perhaps the wrong sacks were delivered. Perhaps somebody wants payment. Perhaps two men are simply maintaining the ancient human tradition of arguing when tired. There is no way to know, and this is where the historical record becomes strangely selective. We know a good deal about rulers, military decisions, construction, and major events surrounding Dover, but reconstructing the precise social composition of the castle population during every phase of 1216 remains difficult. Historians continue to disagree about how many non-combatants were likely present during periods of heightened military danger, and how rapidly ordinary household activity changed as siege conditions intensified. The written sources tend to notice commanders more than laundresses. That does not mean the laundresses disappeared. It means someone forgot to write them down. You notice a woman carrying folded cloth toward one of the buildings. A child follows her. Neither appears in any chronicle. Yet there they are in the life of the place you are imagining. This is the hidden castle. Not simply towers. Not simply kings. People. A servant pauses to adjust the basket on her hip. A boy leads geese through the yard with very limited success. A blacksmith's hammer begins striking somewhere beyond the next building. The rhythm repeats. Metal against metal. Pause. Metal against metal. The sound travels across the ward. Above all of this, guards remain visible along the defensive line. They watch roads. They watch gates. They watch people. In 1216, every arrival matters more than usual. News moves through rumour before it moves through official announcements. Someone has heard that Prince Louis has advanced. Someone else has heard that another town has changed allegiance. A merchant claims the roads are unsafe. A messenger insists the situation is under control, which is usually when everyone becomes less relaxed. You hear fragments as you walk. Names, places, speculation. Nothing certain. The fortress may be made of stone, but information inside it is fluid. One rumour passes from the soldier to a servant, another reaches a cook. By supper, half the castle may have heard a different version. You move deeper through the ward while evening slowly gathers. Smoke hangs lower now. Torches begin appearing near doorways. The smell of food becomes stronger. A bell sounds somewhere inside the complex, and people alter their pace as if they understand a schedule you have not yet learned. Ahead, rising above workshops, roofs, carts, and movement, stands the great keep. Its walls seem almost impossibly solid compared with everything around them. The outer ward has shown you the castle as a settlement. Now that massive central structure waits to show you something else: control within its walls. Movement becomes narrower, doors become more important, and every passage seems designed to remind you that stone can organize people just as effectively as it resists armies. You follow the flow of servants toward it, leaving the animals, carts, and evening arguments behind. The path narrows as you approach the great keep, after the noise and movement of the outer ward. The building feels almost unnaturally still from a distance. Its enormous walls rise in pale stone, square and severe. With towers projecting from the corners, there is nothing delicate about it. The keep does not seem designed to charm you. It seems designed to make you reconsider your intentions. You pass beneath another guarded entrance and feel the atmosphere change almost immediately. Outside, the castle spreads horizontally through yards, workshops, stables, and defensive spaces. Inside the keep, everything becomes vertical. Stairs climb, passages turn, doors interrupt your route, rooms sit behind other rooms. Access matters. The Great Keep at Dover was built during the reign of Henry II, mainly in the 1180s, and it formed the monumental heart of the royal fortress. Its purpose was not simply military, it also expressed royal authority. A visitor approaching Dover would understand, without needing anyone to explain it, that considerable wealth, labour, and political power had been concentrated here. The walls themselves make the argument. You place your hand briefly against the stone. It is cold. Even in milder weather, thick masonry stores a deep chill in winter. The interior can become uncomfortable despite fires burning in important rooms. Stone provides protection, but it is not especially concerned with your personal comfort. You follow a servant through a doorway. The passage beyond is narrow enough that two people carrying bulky objects would immediately become annoyed with one another. That, too, is useful. Restricted movement is part of the building's logic. A medieval keep is not arranged like a modern public building where wide corridors politely guide crowds toward exits. Movement can be controlled through stairways, doors, landings, chambers, and defended thresholds. If trouble enters the building, every narrow point becomes another opportunity to stop it. You climb a staircase, your footsteps echo. The steps are uneven beneath your feet, and the wall brushes close to one shoulder. A small opening lets in a thin strip of daylight. But much of the interior depends on lamps, candles, hearths, and whatever light reaches through windows. It takes time for your eyes to adjust. A servant descends toward you, carrying a bundle of rushes. You flatten yourself against the wall. He passes without ceremony. Another reminder that impressive architecture is mostly an obstacle when somebody needs to carry household supplies upstairs. You reach a larger chamber. Now the character of the keep changes again. It is not a dungeon-like cavern. Important rooms can be surprisingly elaborate. Wall hangings, painted surfaces, wooden furniture, cushions, chests, benches, tables, and textiles soften the severe stone. When a royal household occupies such a fortress, portable decoration helps transform defensive architecture into a setting suitable for ceremony and residence. Most furnishings are movable. That is a useful detail to remember. Medieval elites travel with households and possessions. Beds, tapestries, plate, clothing, documents, and other valuable objects can be transported or stored depending on circumstances. The castle is permanent. Much of its comfort is not. You walk toward a window opening. The walls are so thick that the window recess becomes a small space of its own. You could almost sit inside it. From here, light falls across the floor in a pale rectangle. The view outside is spectacular. You can see walls, roofs, parts of the ward, and beyond them the land falling toward Dover and the sea. It is easy to understand why the keep is such a powerful observation point. It is also easy to understand why climbing these stairs repeatedly would become tiresome by lunchtime. A small architectural curiosity catches your attention. Some surviving medieval buildings contain carved marks left by masons, little symbols made during construction to identify work, organization, or payment. They are not grand inscriptions commemorating kings. They are the quiet fingerprints of labourers who shaped stone blocks centuries ago. Whether every mark had exactly the same purpose is uncertain, but they remind you that enormous royal buildings were produced by hundreds of individual hands. You leave the window and continue. Another doorway, another guard. This man barely moves as you pass. Control inside the keep depends partly on knowing who belongs where. Not everyone has equal access. A kitchen servant may move freely through service areas, but not through private royal chambers. A soldier may guard a stair without being welcome in an elite sleeping room. A clerk may carry documents through spaces where a stable worker would have no reason to appear. The architecture reinforces hierarchy. Where you're permitted to stand says something about who you are. A door opens nearby. Warm air spills out, carrying the smell of smoke and food. For one hopeful moment, you think you have discovered the kitchen. You have not. It is merely a chamber with a fire. Disappointment in 1216 is often very practical. You move onward. Storage rooms occupy important parts of the complex. Food, equipment, textiles, weapons, documents, and valuables all need secure places. Chests are everywhere in medieval domestic life because they are useful for both storage and transport. A chest can hold clothing. Another might hold money. Another could contain records. A heavy chest with a strong lock suddenly seems less like furniture and more like an early filing cabinet with anxiety. You pass one being opened by a clerk. Inside are folded documents. The parchment edges look pale in the dim light. Administration follows you even here. Royal power depends on writing as much as walls. Orders must be recorded, payments tracked, supplies counted, messages sent. The dramatic castle survives because somebody keeps notes. You descend a short flight of steps into a cooler area. The smell changes. Earth, stone, stored grain, wood, perhaps a trace of dampness. Lower spaces can be valuable for storage because temperatures remain relatively stable. Although moisture is a constant enemy, you can imagine sacks arranged away from wet walls, barrels raised slightly from floors, and valuable supplies checked for spoilage. Mice must love this place. Nobody has invited them. They come anyway. Grain stores are difficult to keep completely free of pests, and cats are useful members of medieval households for exactly this reason. A fortress may possess military specialists, skilled administrators, priests, craftsmen, and experienced knights. Yet one small cat stalking a mouse near a flour sack is performing work that everyone appreciates. You hear a faint scratching somewhere. Perhaps the cat has taken the evening off. Up another stair, the keep becomes more formal. Rooms associated with high-status residents are arranged to regulate access. With outer chambers leading toward more private spaces, the exact use of individual rooms can change over time, and later, alterations complicate reconstruction. Scholars continue to debate precisely how some chambers within Dover's keep were used during different phases of the late 12th and early 13th centuries, particularly when trying to separate ceremonial, residential, administrative, and defensive functions from later modifications. A room is not always one thing forever. A fortress adapts. People improvise. During peaceful royal visits, a chamber might support ceremony or lodging. During crisis, the same area could become storage, command space, accommodation, or something entirely more practical, and crisis is approaching. You feel it even within these thick walls. Men speak quietly near a doorway. A messenger passes quickly. A servant carrying candles is told to take them elsewhere. No one explains why. You begin descending again, following the internal route toward the working levels of the keep. The grandeur is still here. So is the hierarchy. But beneath both is something more basic. Someone must clean these floors. Someone must carry fuel up these stairs. Someone must empty containers, fetch water, prepare chambers, mend bedding, tend fires, and wake before everyone else. The keep may represent royal power, yet royal power wakes in the morning only because servants have already been working in the dark. And as you follow the faint smell of smoke toward the lower passages, the castle begins preparing for another day long before the sun appears. Long before daylight reaches the castle walls, someone is already awake. You hear them before you see them. A bucket scrapes across stone. A door opens with a wooden groan. Footsteps hurry through a passage somewhere below, followed by the soft crackle of a fire being encouraged back to life. The keep is still dark. Most important people are still asleep. Servants are not. You descend carefully toward the working spaces, one hand brushing the cold wall for balance. The air feels different at this hour. Yesterday's smoke lingers low in the passages. Rushes beneath your feet hold the faint smell of dampness. Somewhere nearby, a candle guttering in a holder gives off that warm, slightly greasy scent of animal fat. Then another sound joins the morning. Someone coughing, not dramatically. Just the tired cough of a person who's inhaled too much smoke and would probably like another hour in bed. You follow it into a service area where several people are already moving. One man carries split wood toward a hearth. Another kneels beside embers, blowing carefully until orange light spreads through the ash. A woman gathers soiled cloth from a bench. A younger servant carries a jug that looks far too heavy for the speed expected of him. Nobody's standing around waiting for instructions. They already know what needs doing. In a large medieval household, daily life depends on a hierarchy of service. Royal and aristocratic establishments employ people with specialized responsibilities, from chamber servants and kitchen staff to grooms, porters, laundresses, clerks, and men responsible for fuel, lighting, clothing, horses, and stores. The titles can sound impressive. The work usually does not. You discover this as soon as someone hands you a bundle of firewood. Apparently you have been promoted to medieval heating technology. You carry it along a passage. The wood is rough against your palms. Bark flakes onto your sleeves. By the time you reach the chamber where it is needed, your shoulders already ache slightly. Now imagine repeating that journey throughout the day. Fires must be maintained in occupied rooms. Water must be carried. Ash must be removed. Candles must be replaced. Floor coverings must be refreshed. Furniture has to be moved. Chambers have to be prepared for whoever outranks you. Comfort inside a stone fortress does not occur naturally. It is manufactured every morning by human labour. You enter a chamber that was comfortable enough the previous evening, in the cold before sunrise. It feels completely different. The hearth has faded. A faint grey light reaches through the window. The room smells of smoke, wool, wax, and sleeping bodies. A servant opens shutters. Cold air rushes inside. This seems cruel until you realise that stale air and smoke need somewhere to go. Another servant begins gathering the rushes closest to the hearth. Fresh rushes can be spread across floors to provide insulation and make stone or wooden surfaces less unpleasant underfoot. Herbs might sometimes be added for fragrance, particularly in elite settings. Although the romantic image of every medieval floor constantly scented with flowers is probably giving the housekeeping department rather too much credit, old rushes collect dirt, food falls into them, mud enters on shoes, dogs contribute whatever dogs feel is appropriate. Eventually, someone has to remove the mess. That someone is rarely the lord of the castle. You help pull a bundle toward the doorway. Dust lifts into the light. A tiny cloud hangs there for a moment. You sneeze. Nobody expresses sympathy. The castle has survived worse. Farther along, another part of the household is waking. A chamber servant carries warm water. Clothing is being prepared. Beds are adjusted. Blankets are folded. A fire is fed. The order in which these tasks happen matters because powerful people expect their surroundings to be ready when they rise. That expectation creates an invisible schedule. The servant must wake before the person being served. The kitchen must begin before breakfast. The stable must begin before anyone wishes to ride. The gate staff must be ready before travellers arrive. The chapel must be prepared before worship. Medieval hierarchy is therefore partly a hierarchy of sleep. The higher your position, the greater the chance that somebody else wakes first to make your morning possible. You pass a porter carrying keys. They hang from his belt with a heavy metallic clink. Keys matter enormously here. Doors separate spaces. Stores require protection. Entrances are controlled. Rooms containing valuables need supervision. Even servants who seem socially unimportant may hold practical responsibilities, without which the castle immediately becomes vulnerable. A sleepy guard can be dangerous. A careless storekeeper can ruin provisions. A servant who lets a fire die may leave an important chamber freezing. A groom who neglects a horse may leave someone without transport. There is very little truly trivial work. One small surviving glimpse from medieval household records makes this clearer than heroic stories ever could. Payments and allowances can appear for tasks involving candles, bedding, laundry, fuel, horses, kitchen utensils, clothing repairs, and endless quantities of food. Entire administrative systems exist partly because somebody must account for the things being carried past you right now. A broom passes over the floor. Not a modern broom, of course. More likely bundled twigs or brush. It does the job reasonably well until it catches on something. The servant using it mutters, "You pretend not to hear." Gentle historical immersion has limits. You move toward a washing area. Laundry is one of the hardest forms of domestic work. Clothing, linens, towels, and bedding are valuable. Washing them means hauling water, heating it when necessary, using substances such as soap or alkaline cleaning agents, scrubbing fabric by hand, rinsing it, carrying it again, and finding somewhere suitable for drying. There is no button-mark, delicate cycle. You see a woman inspecting stained linen with the expression of someone facing a personal enemy. Another lifts a wet cloth. Water streams from it. Her hands are red from cold. Who exactly performed all laundry work inside Dover during the crisis of 1216 is difficult to reconstruct. Surviving records illuminate certain offices and payments far better than the identities of lower status domestic workers. And the balance between permanent staff, temporary labour, household dependents, and locally recruited assistants can shift according to circumstance. That uncertainty follows you everywhere. The most exhausting people to study historically are often the people who left the fewest documents. A senior servant might appear in an account. A woman carrying water perhaps never does. A boy cleaning cookware may vanish completely from written memory. Yet the building could not function without them. You begin noticing how young some workers appear. Childhood in medieval society does not necessarily mean freedom from responsibility. Young people can perform errands, assist adults, tend animals, carry small loads, learn trades, or serve in households. One boy darts past you holding several candles. He nearly collides with a doorway. The candles survive. His dignity does not. He looks around quickly to see whether anyone noticed. You did? You promise history that you will remain discreet. The castle is becoming louder now. More doors open. More fires burn. The first pale light spreads beyond the narrow windows. From somewhere outside comes the call of a guard changing watch. Stable noises increase. Horses stamp. Buckets fill. A bell sounds. And suddenly the quiet labour of the previous hour reveals its purpose. The fortress appears to wake all at once. But you know better. It has been awake for some time. You watch servants hurry in opposite directions carrying breadboards, water, cloth, fuel, and messages. Their movements intersect like threads holding the castle together. There is an odd intimacy to seeing Dover this way. The towers no longer seem purely military. Every stair bears footsteps. Every chamber requires cleaning. Every hearth consumes wood. Every sleeper leaves bedding behind. Every meal creates dirty vessels. Every horse creates work. And every important person depends on someone whose name probably never reaches a chronicle. A warmer smell begins drifting through the passage. Bread, smoke, boiling liquid, perhaps onions, perhaps meat, whatever it is. Several servants automatically turn their heads toward it. So do you. The kitchens are fully awake now. And as another load of firewood disappears through a doorway, you follow the smell deeper into the working heart of the fortress, toward the place where hundreds of appetites are about to become somebody else's problem. The smell reaches you before the heat does. Bread, Onions, smoke, damp wood, boiling broth, roasted meat, and something slightly scorched drift through the passage in overlapping waves by the time you step into the working kitchen spaces. The castle's morning has become a full assault on the senses, not an unpleasant assault. Mostly. A cook shouts for more wood, someone else wants a knife. A boy carries a basket of onions past you, and immediately returns empty-handed, moving with the speed of a person who's been told that being slow is a character flaw. Several large pots sit near the fire. Steam curls upward and disappears into the smoky air. You move closer and instantly regret it. The heat on your face is fierce. Your back remains cold. This is one of the strange physical realities of medieval kitchens. You can be sweating beside the fire while freezing 2 steps away. There is no gentle, evenly distributed warmth. There is flame. There is stone. You choose. Feeding a fortress like Dover requires organisation on a scale that has little in common with preparing a quiet family supper. Large royal and military households consume enormous quantities of food, and the basic staples matter far more than elegant dishes. Bread is central, so is ale. Meat appears when available and appropriate, alongside fish, cheese, peas, beans, pottage, grain, and whatever fresh produce can be obtained or stored. The wealthy may enjoy spices and more elaborate preparations, but hundreds of hungry people cannot live entirely on impressive sources. Someone has to make porridge. You watch a servant stir a thick mixture in a pot. It looks determined not to be stirred. The wooden paddle disappears into it with alarming resistance. You decide that if medieval warfare fails, this substance could probably be used to reinforce a gate nearby. Bread is being prepared in quantity. Flour dust hangs in the air. Dough is shaped. Loaves wait for baking. Bread is so ordinary that it almost disappears from written descriptions of daily life. Yet it is essential. Grain has to be bought or collected, transported, stored safely, milled into flour, mixed, kneaded, baked, distributed, and protected from spoilage. Every loaf is the end of a long chain of labour, and every broken link in that chain matters more during a siege. You begin to see how food becomes strategy. The walls can be magnificent, the soldiers can be brave, but if flour runs out, bravery becomes noticeably less comfortable. A kitchen worker carries a slab of salted meat toward a cutting table. Preservation is crucial. Without refrigeration, meat must be eaten relatively quickly, salted, smoked, dried, or otherwise managed carefully. Fish can also be salted or dried, and preserved foods become particularly valuable when fresh supplies are uncertain. You notice barrels stacked in a cooler space. Some may hold ale, others wine, others salted provisions. Barrels are everywhere because they are wonderfully practical containers for medieval logistics. They also roll, usually when you least want them to. One worker pushes a barrel into place with his shoulder while another wedges it securely. The first man steps back. The barrel shifts. Both men freeze. It stops. Nobody speaks. There is a brief silence of mutual respect between humanity and gravity. Then work resumes. You move toward the main hearth. There are hooks, spits, pots, pans, knives, ladles, wooden boards, and tools that have been repaired so many times that some seem to have acquired personalities. Ironware is valuable. Metal must be maintained. Handles break, edges dull, pots crack, wooden utensils split. The kitchen is not simply a place where food is cooked. It is a small ecosystem of maintenance. A spit turns slowly. Perhaps a joint of meat is roasting. Fat drips toward the fire, causing sudden flares and a smell rich enough to make several passing servants glance over. Meat distribution is shaped by status. The best cuts tend to travel upward in the household hierarchy. Lower status workers receive simpler portions, broth, bread, grain dishes, scraps, and whatever is allotted. This does not mean everyone below the nobility is starving. It means that food expresses rank. Where you sit matters. What you eat matters. How much you receive matters. Even the order in which dishes arrive can quietly announce who is important. Medieval dining has etiquette embedded in calories. You are handed a wooden bowl. Apparently you have been mistaken for someone useful again. A cook ladles in a portion of hot pottage. You hold it carefully. Steam rises. It smells of grain, onion, herbs, and perhaps a little meat fat. You taste it. It is better than expected. Not luxurious, not disgusting, just warm, filling, and practical. That alone corrects another modern stereotype. Medieval food is not uniformly foul. Skilled cooks know how to season, combine, roast, bake, boil, thicken, preserve, and present food. Elite kitchens especially can produce sophisticated dishes using imported spices, wine, vinegar, fruit, nuts, and carefully managed techniques. But the cuisine depends on resources. In a fortress facing military pressure, the practical question becomes increasingly important. How long can you keep feeding everyone you glance toward the stores? No one here knows exactly how difficult that question will become. A curious little aspect of medieval cooking is the frequent use of ingredients modern diners might not expect together. Sweet and savoury flavours can share the same dish. Dried fruits, spices, meat, wine, vinegar, and sugar or honey might appear in combinations that would feel unusual to a 21st century palate. Pepper, cinnamon, cloves, ginger, saffron, and other imported spices carry prestige partly because they travel through long commercial networks. Of course, nobody is sprinkling saffron into every soldier's breakfast. That would be a fascinating way to bankrupt the garrison. The expensive ingredients belong mainly to higher status tables and special occasions. For the majority, the rhythm is simpler: bread, ale, pottage, cheese, fish, meat when allocated, beans or peas. Whatever can be stored and stretched. You watch a man cutting onions. His eyes water. He looks deeply offended by vegetables or across the room. A kitchen servant carries dirty cookware toward another area. Cooking produces cleaning. This is the hidden second half of every meal. Grease clings to pots. Ash settles everywhere. Bones accumulate. Vegetable scraps pile up. Water is constantly needed. Fuel disappears astonishingly quickly. The more people you feed, the more waste you create, and in a castle, all of it has to go somewhere. Food waste may be fed to animals, discarded or reused when possible. Bones can have secondary uses. Ash can be useful. Grease may be saved for practical purposes. Medieval households are not operating under modern recycling slogans, but valuable materials are rarely thrown away casually if they can serve another purpose. Even stale bread can sometimes find a second life in cooking. Nothing is romantic about economy, it is simply sensible. The kitchen grows louder. A clerk appears briefly at the doorway. He speaks with someone supervising provisions. Numbers are exchanged, barrels mentioned, sacks counted. The conversation becomes more serious. Military uncertainty changes the meaning of stored food. In peaceful times, a barrel is dinner under siege. It is time. How carefully Dover had stocked every category of provision. Immediately before the crisis remains difficult to pin down in complete detail. Surviving administrative evidence can reveal purchases and preparations, but it does not provide a perfect inventory of every storeroom at every moment, and household consumption could fluctuate rapidly as troops, servants, refugees, and animals increased or decreased. So you imagine the cooks doing what cooks always do when supplies feel uncertain. They stretch, they substitute, they watch. A smaller portion here, more grain there, a little less meat, nothing dramatic yet. But habits begin to change before anyone calls them rationing. You finish the last spoonful from your bowl. Warmth settles pleasantly in your stomach for a brief moment. The fortress feels almost comfortable. Then a servant passes carrying a bucket of greasy water. Another follows with food scraps. A third complains that the drain is blocked. You look toward the passage they're taking. The smell drifting from that direction is considerably less inviting than breakfast. Every meal produces consequences. Every human body does too. And now, having admired the bread, the fires, and the efficient machinery of feeding a castle, you are about to discover where everything goes after the useful part is finished. The change in smell is immediate. You leave the warm kitchen passage behind and follow the servant carrying greasy water toward a darker corner of the fortress. Smoke and bread fade. In their place come damp stone, stale straw, animal waste, old ash, and the unmistakable evidence that hundreds of people living behind walls create problems that walls cannot solve. The bucket in front of you sloshes dangerously. You give it space. There are many things in medieval life worth experiencing closely. That bucket is not one of them. The servant reaches a disposal area and empties the contents with practiced indifference. He's done this many times, probably too many. You begin to understand that sanitation inside a castle is not a single system. It is a collection of habits, structures, containers, drains, pits, channels, servants, and hopeful attempts to move unpleasant things away from important people. Water sits at the center of almost everything. People need it for drinking. Cooks need it for food. Animals need it. Laundry consumes it. Cleaning requires it. Craftwork may require it. Firefighting certainly benefits from having some nearby, and during a siege. Reliable access to water can become as important as any wall. Dover's medieval fortress possessed wells and water arrangements intended to support occupation on this exposed hilltop. A major castle could not depend casually on somebody walking downhill with a bucket every time a cook became thirsty. That would be inefficient on a peaceful Tuesday. Under attack, it would be suicidal. You approach a well. The opening is protected, and the mechanism for drawing water is simple but laborious. Rope creaks under tension. A container disappears into darkness. You lean slightly forward. The depth is unsettling. Cold air seems to rise from below. A worker turns the mechanism and eventually brings the container upward again. Water spills over the edge as it reaches the top. The man fills another vessel, then another and another. There is no magical arrival of water through a pipe. Every quantity moved through the castle requires effort. A gallon has weight. 20 gallons have opinions. You try carrying a full bucket only a short distance. The wooden handle presses sharply into your fingers. Water swings against the sides. A small amount splashes onto your leg. By the time you reach the doorway, you have discovered why medieval servants do not require gym memberships. You put the bucket down with relief. Someone picks it up and continues without comment. Clearly, your contribution has not transformed castle logistics. Nearby, washing takes place on a modest scale. Hands are rinsed, cloths are cleaned, vessels are scrubbed. The idea that medieval people never wash is one of those durable modern myths that survives mainly because it is entertaining. People do wash. They clean hands and faces. They bathe when circumstances permit. Religious and social expectations can encourage cleanliness. Elite households may have access to tubs, heated water, scented preparations, combs, cloths, and attendants. What they do not have is continuous running water, modern sewage treatment, antibacterial soap, or the assumption that everyone showers every morning. Cleanliness is therefore possible. Convenience is not. You pass a servant carrying a basin away from a chamber. Used water must go somewhere. Again, there is a pattern developing. A narrow passage brings you toward one of the castle's garderobes. The word sounds rather elegant. The experience is less so. A garderobe is essentially a latrine built into the structure, often positioned so waste drops through a shaft or opening toward an external pit, ditch, or lower area in a large stone castle. This is a considerable improvement over keeping everything in a chamber. It is not, however, a spa. You approach cautiously. A cold draught moves through the opening. The seat is simple. Privacy depends on the arrangement of the chamber and the courtesy of everyone else. There is no flush. There is no scented aerosol. There is certainly no little sign reminding employees to wash their hands for 20 seconds. Gravity handles the main engineering. You decide medieval gravity deserves more credit. Castle builders incorporated latrine shafts into defensive and residential structures because bodily needs do not stop when architecture becomes impressive. Some towers and chambers could have dedicated facilities, especially where higher status occupants lived. This also creates maintenance problems as shafts can become blocked, pits must be cleared, waste accumulates, and somebody has to deal with it. The identity of that unfortunate person probably does not appear in heroic songs. You step away from the guardrobe and take a deeper breath. That was a mistake. A servant passing nearby smiles slightly. You suspect he recognizes a newcomer. There is another small historical curiosity associated with guardrobes. The term became connected with clothing storage, and it has sometimes been suggested that garments were kept nearby because the ammonia or strong odours discouraged moths or other pests. The neatness of that explanation is tempting. The documentary reality is less tidy, and the relationship between the name, clothing storage, and latrine use varies across time and place. Still, it provides one of those wonderfully medieval moments when sanitation, language, and wardrobe history all collide in the same narrow stone chamber. You continue into the ward. Outside, sanitation becomes even more complicated. Animals share the castle. Horses produce manure, dogs roam, poultry scratch through dirt. Food waste accumulates near kitchens. Ash comes from fires. Straw becomes soiled. Mud enters everywhere. Drainage channels carry some water away, but rain can overwhelm low spots and blocked drains. You watch a servant pushing debris away from a channel with a wooden tool. The mixture is not something you wish to identify carefully. The drain clears. Dirty water begins moving again. Victory. A very small victory. But castle life depends on thousands of these. The relationship between medieval sanitation and disease is easy to oversimplify. People in 1216 do not understand microorganisms in the modern sense, yet they can recognize foul smells, spoiled food, contaminated water, vermin, and unhealthy conditions through experience. They may interpret disease through humoral ideas, religion, environment, or combinations of explanations unfamiliar to you. But they are not incapable of noticing that rotten things are unpleasant and dirty water can cause trouble. What remains harder to establish is exactly how consistently regulations and cleaning practices were enforced during periods of military emergency at Dover. Administrative ideals could be sensible on parchment, while actual conditions inside an overcrowded fortress became considerably messier. A siege has a way of defeating housekeeping. More people arrive, more animals arrive. More waste is produced. Space becomes tighter. Servants become overworked. Outside disposal areas may become dangerous to access. Everything unpleasant grows more concentrated. You notice flies near a refuse pile. A dog investigates them. A servant waves the animal away. Fleas are another constant possibility. So are lice, bedding, wool clothing, straw, animals, and crowded sleeping conditions provide excellent opportunities for parasites. Fine social rank does not make you invisible to insects. A nobleman may sleep beneath expensive textiles. A flea remains unimpressed. Combs can help control lice. And personal grooming matters, but complete elimination is difficult. You scratch your arm almost automatically. Perhaps nothing is there. Perhaps history has become psychological. The afternoon air carries another sharp smell. A stable is being cleaned. Old straw is forked out and replaced. Manure is collected. Some waste has value outside the castle as fertilizer, though moving and managing it during tense military conditions is hardly simple. Nothing here disappears. It changes location. That may be the most accurate summary of medieval sanitation. You look back toward the keep. From this distance, it is magnificent again, solid, royal, almost clean. The illusion returns surprisingly quickly. Then a servant emerges carrying a chamber pot. The illusion leaves. You follow the movement toward the residential spaces as daylight begins fading. Water has been fetched. Waste has been shifted. Floors have been swept. Beds are being prepared again. Soon hundreds of people will settle into whatever sleeping places their rank allows. And once darkness closes around the fortress, every creak, cough, snore, draught, barking dog, and distant footstep will become part of the castle's nighttime life. By the time darkness settles over Dover, the castle seems to shrink. The courtyards are still there. The walls remain enormous. The keep still rises above everything around it. Yet once daylight disappears, your world becomes whatever can be reached by candlelight, torchlight, or memory. You follow a servant carrying a small lamp through a passage. Its flame bends whenever cold air slips through a doorway. Shadows move across the stone. Corners that seemed ordinary during the day now look deeper and less friendly. Outside, the wind brushes the walls with a low continuous sound. Inside, people are preparing to sleep, or, more accurately, preparing to attempt it. The idea of everyone retiring quietly to private bedrooms belongs to a much later world. In a fortress like Dover, sleeping arrangements depend heavily on rank, occupation, space, and circumstance. Senior figures may have access to private or semi-private chambers, better bedding, heavier curtains, and servants nearby. Lower status workers and soldiers are more likely to sleep communally. Wherever space has been assigned or improvised, you step into one such room. It is already crowded. Several men are arranging blankets and bedding along the floor and against the walls. A bench has been pushed aside. Cloaks are folded into rough pillows. A man removes his boots and immediately fills the room with evidence that medieval footwear has experienced a long day. Nobody comments. Perhaps everyone else is equally guilty. A small fire burns at one end, but its warmth weakens quickly with distance. Those nearest it are comfortable enough. Those farther away are learning patience. You find a place near the wall. The stone is cold even through your clothing. Rushes or straw beneath you provide some insulation, though not much. Bedding among ordinary soldiers and servants can be simple, while elite households possess mattresses, blankets, quilts, sheets, cushions, and curtains that turn sleep into a much softer experience. The difference is striking. Status follows you into unconsciousness. A wealthy person may sleep on a raised bed with layered textiles. You may sleep beside a man named Robert who snores before he is fully horizontal. Robert wins. The first snore rolls through the room. Someone throws a rolled piece of cloth at him. He does not wake. You begin to understand why medieval people sometimes share beds. Beds are expensive objects. Warmth matters. Space is limited. Sleeping two or more people together can be practical and entirely ordinary. Depending on social relationships and circumstances, privacy, as you understand it, is not always the governing priority. Even high-status rooms are rarely sealed bubbles of solitude. Servants may sleep nearby, guards remain within reach, attendants might share chambers, visitors can be accommodated wherever arrangements permit. The castle is a household before it is a hotel. And nobody has left a chocolate on your pillow. You lie back. The ceiling is barely visible. A candle burns near the door. Its light flickers over sleeping bodies and hanging clothing. For several minutes, everything seems surprisingly peaceful. Then the castle begins making noises. A floorboard creaks somewhere above. A horse stamps outside. A door bangs. Footsteps cross a passage. Someone coughs. Someone else coughs in a response, as though the two are conducting a conversation. The wind finds a narrow gap and whistles through it. Then Robert snores again. You close your eyes. Sleep in 1216 is shaped by darkness far more strongly than modern sleep. Artificial lighting exists, of course, but candles, lamps, hearths, and torches consume resources. Once work is finished, there is little reason to illuminate every space for hours. Night becomes genuinely dark. That darkness changes routine. People often organize activity around available daylight. Seasonal rhythms, religious observance, watches, and household schedules rather than a precise modern clock. You do not glance at a glowing screen to discover that it is 11:47. You listen for bells, you judge the fire, you notice how long it has been since supper. Your body becomes part of the timekeeping system. Beyond the room, guards remain awake. Their night is very different from yours. Somewhere on the walls, men stand watch over roads, approaches, and the dark landscape beyond the defences. Their duty divides the night into periods of vigilance. Cold becomes an enemy. So does boredom. So does sleep itself. A sentry who drifts off at the wrong moment risks much more than embarrassment. With political crisis surrounding Dover, night watch becomes especially important. In 1216, the fortress sits at the centre of military resistance to Prince Louis and the rebel baron supporting him. A strong garrison cannot simply shut the doors at sunset and assume everyone outside will behave politely until morning. You imagine a guard above you, his cloak pulled tight, his breath visible, his eyes scanning darkness where almost nothing moves. Perhaps distant lights mark homes below. Perhaps a ship shows faintly offshore. Perhaps there is only blackness. The silence between sounds can be worse than the sounds themselves. Inside your sleeping chamber, someone shifts beside you. Another man is whispering. The words are too quiet to understand. Maybe he is praying. Maybe discussing rumours. Maybe complaining about the floor. You would sympathise with all three. A draft passes across your face. You pull the blanket higher. Textiles are valuable partly because warmth is difficult to create in large stone buildings. Heavy curtains around elite beds can reduce drafts and retain heat. Wall hangings are not merely decorative either. They can soften interiors physically as well as visually, helping make cold masonry more tolerable. This means a grand chamber can feel very different from the room where you are sleeping. You imagine one higher in the keep, a better bed, thick curtains, a chest nearby, a servant on a pallet, a fire still glowing, perhaps a candle remains burning. Then even there comes the same wind. Stone does not respect social class entirely. That is mildly comforting. An odd habit recorded across parts of medieval Europe complicates the modern assumption that everyone always sleeps in one uninterrupted block. People could sometimes wake during the night, pray, talk, tend fires, perform small tasks, or simply remain awake before returning to sleep. Evidence for patterns of segmented sleep varies by period and context, so it would be reckless to assume every person in Dover follows an identical routine. Still, the night is long, and human beings have always found things to do when sleep refuses to cooperate. You discover that personally. Your eyes open again. The fire is lower. More people are asleep. Robert has entered a new phase of snoring that sounds almost architectural. You stare into the darkness. How many people are actually sleeping inside Dover tonight? No surviving list gives you a perfect answer for every moment of 1216. Garrison numbers could change. Household staff came and went. Military pressure altered who remained within the defences, and non-combatants are particularly difficult to count. Chroniclers cared about commanders and dramatic actions, not about producing a neat census of everyone lying on the straw after midnight. The uncertainty makes the darkness feel crowded with unnamed lives, servants, stable hands, cooks, clerks, priests, messengers, soldiers, women, children, travellers, craftsmen, each person occupying a tiny piece of space inside this enormous fortress. Another bell sounds, faint, measured, somewhere beyond the walls. A watch changes. You hear boots in the passage as men move toward duty. One enters your room and nudges a sleeping soldier. The man wakes reluctantly, for a few seconds. He has the expression of someone hoping history has been cancelled. It has not. He pulls on his boots, wraps himself in a cloak, checks his equipment, and disappears through the doorway. Cold air enters with him. You consider complaining, Then you remember he's going to stand on a wall in the wind while you remain beneath a blanket. You decide to forgive him. Morning is still distant, but the fortress never truly sleeps. Guards rotate, fires are checked, animals shift in stalls, someone tends a lamp. Somewhere a servant rises to answer a call from an important chamber. The hidden machinery continues at a slower rhythm, and before long, those night watches will merge into the routines of the garrison itself, where boredom, discipline, weapons, and repeated inspections prepare ordinary men for the moment when watching the horizon becomes something much more serious. By the time the soldier you watch disappear into the darkness reaches the wall walk, sleep has vanished from his face. The wind sees to that. You follow at a distance, climbing after him through a narrow stair where the air grows colder with every turn. When you emerge onto the defensive line, the channel wind strikes immediately, flattening your clothing against you and carrying the smell of salt over the fortress. Below, most of Dover remains dark, inside the castle. However, the garrison is already changing rhythm. Night watch becomes morning duty. Morning duty becomes inspection. Inspection becomes waiting, and waiting, you soon discover, occupies a very large part of military life. The guard beside you peers outward. Nothing moves. He keeps looking anyway. That is the job. In 1216, Dover Castle is not defended by men who spend every waking hour dramatically swinging swords. A functioning garrison depends on routine. Gates must be watched, walls patrolled, weapons maintained, stores checked, messages carried, horses cared for, and duty rosters enforced. The work is repetitive because repetition is what makes a fortress reliable. A gate left unwatched once may be enough. A damaged crossbow ignored for one day may matter at exactly the wrong moment. A sleepy sentry who decides that nobody has attacked lately, so nobody probably will, is the sort of person commanders prefer not to employ twice. You walk beside the wall as dawn slowly begins to reveal the countryside. The first light is grey. Fields appear below as darker patches. Roads emerge gradually from the landscape. The sea becomes visible last, flat and cold beneath the brightening sky. A second guard approaches from the opposite direction. The two men exchange a few words. No ceremony, no trumpet, just confirmation that nothing unusual has happened. That itself is good news. You descend with them toward a gathering area where several soldiers are checking equipment. Weapons need constant attention. Iron rusts, wood splits, leather stretches. Bowstrings and crossbowstrings deteriorate, bindings loosen, edges become dull. A soldier who neglects his equipment may discover the problem only after it becomes urgent. You watch one man examine the head of a spear. Another runs a cloth over metal fittings. A crossbowman checks the mechanism of his weapon with slow, practiced movements. Crossbows are particularly important in the warfare of this period. They can deliver powerful bolts and require less lifelong training than the kind of archery later associated with the English longbow, though skilled use still demands experience, maintenance, judgment, and nerve. Dover's defenders in 1216 included crossbowmen, and men using such weapons could be highly valuable during a siege. You examine one from a respectful distance. It is compact compared with the enormous theatrical machines sometimes shown in films, but it has a seriousness to it. The weapon stores energy mechanically. That means loading it can require significant force. Different spanning methods exist, depending on the design and strength of the bow. The soldier working beside you has clearly done this many times. His movements are efficient. Yours would not be. You are wise enough not to volunteer. Across the yard, several men practice with bows or crossbows at prepared targets. Military training does not need to look glamorous. Most of it consists of repeating the same action until the body no longer has to negotiate every step consciously. Raise, aim, release, reload, check. Again. A bolt strikes wood with a hard, compact thud. Another lands lower. A third misses and earns quiet laughter. The shooter looks offended. Apparently, even in a fortress facing invasion, colleagues remain colleagues. A man nearby is inspecting shields. Wooden shields require maintenance too. Their surfaces may be reinforced, covered, repaired, or repainted. Straps wear out. Edges take damage. Nothing stays battle-ready merely because it was battle-ready yesterday. You move toward the gatehouse. Here, discipline feels tighter. Gate duty is among the most important tasks in any fortified place. Doors, bars, locks, bridges, passages, and guards work together as one system. The gate is both the connection to the outside world and the point where the outside world becomes dangerous. Travelers arrive, messengers come through, supplies enter, animals pass, workers move in and out. Every opening creates vulnerability. So guards question people, they inspect loads, they watch who accompanies whom. They learn familiar faces. A person moving confidently does not automatically belong. That lesson has aged extremely well. You stand near the gate as a wagon approaches. The guards examine it. One man speaks with the driver while another checks the load. Sacks, barrels, bundles, nothing dramatic. The wagon is admitted, then everyone returns to waiting. The difference between calm routine and crisis can be less than a minute. For now, however, boredom wins. You sit with several soldiers against a sheltered section of wall. One repairs a strap, another eats bread. A third tells a story about a horse that allegedly threw an arrogant knight into a pond. The details improve each time he tells it. By the third version, the pond has become a moat. Nobody believes him. Everyone listens anyway. This kind of informal storytelling leaves almost no trace in official records. But armies and garrisons are made of people, and people fill empty hours with jokes, gossip, games, arguments, songs, gambling, repairs, and stories. Small gaming pieces and dice are known from medieval contexts, and dice in particular are simple enough to carry almost anywhere. Of course, commanders and clergy do not always approve of gambling. That has rarely stopped gambling. A pair of men nearby roll small objects onto a wooden surface. One groans, the other smiles. You suspect somebody has just lost part of his wages. He looks at the dice as though betrayed by family. The game disappears quickly when a superior approaches. Suddenly everyone is extremely interested in equipment maintenance. You admire the transformation. The officer checks weapons and asks questions. Men answer. Some stand straighter. Military hierarchy is often most visible in little moments. Who gives orders? Who reports? Who can leave a post? Who decides when a gate closes? Who receives punishment when something goes wrong? Hubert de Burgh. The commander associated with Dover's famous defence in 1216 sits near the top of this local military world, but command depends on layers of officers and experienced men below him. A fortress cannot be managed personally by one heroic commander walking around solving every problem. Someone supervises guards, someone accounts for supplies, someone organises watch rotations, someone makes sure the same unfortunate soldier does not accidentally serve 3 nights in a row, at least, ideally. How large Dover's active defending force was at each exact stage of the crisis is harder to settle than popular retelling sometimes suggest. Medieval chroniclers often provide numbers that deserve caution, and garrison strength could change through reinforcement, casualties, departures, and the presence of temporary forces. Modern reconstructions therefore have to combine narrative accounts with administrative evidence, rather than accepting every convenient figure literally. For you, standing in the yard, the uncertainty feels natural. People keep arriving, others disappear into buildings. Some soldiers are on walls, some are at gates, some are sleeping after night duty, some are repairing equipment. A head count depends very much on where you stand. Late morning brings another exercise. Several men move heavy stones and timber near the defences. Siege preparation requires more than weapons carried in the hand. Timber may reinforce structures. Stones can be positioned for defensive use. Ammunition must be distributed. Damaged parapets and wooden features need repair. Labourers are as important as fighters. You help move a bundle of shafts. It is awkward rather than enormously heavy. Still, by the time you reach the storage area, your arms complain. A soldier takes the bundle from you. He gives you the mild expression of someone wondering why you made that look difficult. You decide not to explain that you come from a century with office chairs. The sun is higher now. The castle is fully awakened. A bell sounds. Men rotate from one duty to another. The soldiers who trained earlier take food. New guards move toward the walls. At the gate, another messenger arrives. This one is different. His horse is sweating. Mud marks its legs. The rider dismounts quickly. Conversation near the entrance stops. A guard leads him inward. You catch only fragments. London, Louis, movement. For the first time that morning, boredom evaporates completely. Men straighten. An officer crosses the yard at speed. Someone calls for another guard. The messenger disappears toward the command spaces. No alarm sounds yet. No enemy stands beneath the walls. But everyone understands that the routine they have been practicing is no longer merely routine. Prince Louis is moving through England. Dover may soon become more than a guarded fortress. It may become the obstacle an invading army cannot afford to leave behind, and around you. Men begin preparing accordingly. The messenger's arrival changes the mood faster than any bell could. A few minutes ago, men were checking straps, joking over dice, and complaining about the wind. Now conversations shorten. Orders travel across the yard. Servants are redirected. Guards at the gate begin examining arrivals with greater care. You do not hear anyone announce that Dover is preparing for a siege. Nobody needs to. The castle tells you. A wagon that might normally have waited until afternoon is unloaded immediately. Sacks of grain disappear into storage. Barrels are rolled beneath cover. Timber is dragged toward defensive positions. A group of men carries bundles of crossbow bolts toward the walls. Preparation has begun. Prince Louis of France has crossed into England after being invited by rebellious barons opposing King John. By 1216, royal authority has fractured badly enough that large parts of the kingdom no longer feel securely controlled by the king. Louis is not arriving as a raider hoping to steal a few cattle. He has been offered the English crown. That makes Dover extraordinarily important. You climb toward the wall again and look southeast. Beyond the cliffs lies the Channel. France feels close here, uncomfortably close. If Louis and his supporters are to move troops, supplies, messages, and reinforcements between England and the continent, the southeastern coast matters enormously. Dover stands directly beside one of the most convenient crossing points. Leaving a hostile fortress here would be rather like moving into a new house, while allowing the previous owner to keep the front hallway. Eventually, somebody will object that somebody is Hubert de Burgh. As Constable of Dover Castle, Hubert becomes one of the central figures in its defence. He is an experienced royal servant who has already survived the complicated politics of King John's reign. Inside the castle, however, his authority appears less romantic than later storytelling may suggest. Orders, inspections, supply calculations, repair work, messages, more orders. Heroism often begins with administration. You descend into the ward and find carpenters working near a defensive structure. Fresh chips cover the ground. The smell of cut timber briefly overwhelms the usual mixture of smoke and animals. One man measures a beam, another shapes wood with an axe, a third checks iron fittings. Timber is essential in fortification even when the walls themselves are stone. Gates, doors, hoardings, platforms, roofs, braces, barriers, machinery, and temporary defensive works can all depend on wood. An approaching siege turns carpenters into military personnel without giving them swords. You watch a heavy beam being carried toward a gateway. 6 men struggle with it. Nobody looks heroic. Everyone looks irritated. One man loses his footing in the mud, recovers, and continues while pretending nothing happened. You respect him enough not to smile. Near another store, arrows and crossbow bolts are being inspected. Shafts must be straight. Metal points must be sound. Fletching needs attention. A damaged missile is not automatically useless. But nobody wants to discover defects when attackers are already beneath the wall. Bundles are divided among positions. The quantity seems enormous until you imagine hundreds of shots being released over several days. Then it seems alarmingly small. That is the strange arithmetic of siege preparation. Everything disappears faster than expected. Food, firewood, missiles, patience. A clerk is counting sacks inside a storeroom. You recognize the careful expression of someone who would prefer the numbers to be larger. Another man records something on parchment. Grain receives particular attention because bread and pottage can keep large numbers of people fed efficiently. Salted foods are checked. Ale is counted. Fodder for horses matters too, because animals consume supplies without understanding military emergencies. One horse nearby continues eating with admirable political neutrality. You begin noticing another change. Anything outside the defences that might help an attacker becomes suspicious. Timber near the walls, loose materials, structures that could provide shelter, paths that offer easy approaches, vegetation that blocks visibility. Defenders preparing for a siege often reshape the space around a fortress, so enemies cannot use it comfortably. The landscape itself becomes part of the defence. This can be brutal for people living nearby. Military necessity has very little sympathy for somebody's fence. You look down toward buildings beyond the castle. How much was cleared, altered, or deliberately denied to the attackers around Dover during the preparations of 1216 cannot be reconstructed perfectly from surviving descriptions. Later accounts emphasize the drama of the siege. While archaeology and architectural study reveal changes made across different periods, sorting emergency measures from later improvements requires caution. The earth remembers less neatly than chronicles pretend. Back inside. Labourers carry stones toward the walls. Some may be intended for repair, others could become ammunition. Dropping or throwing heavy objects from a height is not sophisticated. But sophistication matters surprisingly little to the person underneath. Buckets are positioned as well. Fire is always a danger in crowded fortifications containing timber roofs, workshops, stored fuel, bedding, and wooden machinery. Attackers know this. Defenders know it too. Water must therefore serve not only kitchens and thirsty soldiers, but emergency firefighting. You find yourself beside a line of containers and suddenly appreciate every miserable bucket you carried earlier. The castle's sanitation problem has become part of its defence plan. Everything connects eventually. A bell rings, not an alarm, a signal. Men shift positions. More guards move toward entrances. The castle is beginning to regulate movement more tightly. People who once came and went casually may now require permission. Merchants delivering supplies are watched. Messengers are questioned. Strangers become interesting. Rumours of spies appear almost automatically in wartime. Whether most suspected spies actually exist is another question entirely. Fear is exceptionally good at hiring imaginary employees. A soldier tells you that someone was caught signalling from outside the walls. Another says that is nonsense. A third insists the signal was merely laundry hung from a house, within 10 minutes. The story includes 3 conspirators and a secret tunnel. You have just witnessed medieval social media. No device required. The humour fades when another mounted messenger arrives. He speaks with officers near the gate. You cannot hear everything. But the name Louis travels clearly enough. Men glance toward the coast. The French prince's advance through England has been aided by John's political collapse. London has welcomed Louis, and many barons have supported him. Yet Dover remains loyal to the king. That loyalty transforms the fortress into an obstacle, a very large obstacle. You follow a group of soldiers upward. The defensive circuit now looks different because you know what is coming. Men test positions. Crossbowmen examine fields of fire. Loose stones are moved away from walkways. Repairs that could have waited last week suddenly cannot wait another hour. A mason kneels beside damaged stonework. Dust coats his hands. He works while armed men move around him in this moment. The boundary between civilian labour and warfare nearly disappears. A siege is not defended only by fighters. It is defended by anyone who keeps the fortress functioning. Cooks preserve strength. Smiths preserve weapons. Carpenters preserve gates. Masons preserve walls. Servants preserve fires, water, and movement. Clerks preserve order. Priests preserve confidence, or at least attempt to. Even children may carry small objects, deliver messages, or help households prepare. There is no dramatic music, just more work. Late afternoon turns the channel silver. You stand near a crossbowman looking toward the roads below. He has stopped joking. The weapon rests against the wall beside him. A few birds circle above the cliffs. For several minutes nothing happens. Then, far across the landscape, movement appears, small at first, a cluster on the road. Perhaps riders, perhaps scouts, perhaps nothing important. The guard beside you narrows his eyes. Another man is called over. They speak quietly. Nobody sounds frightened. Not yet. But the castle feels different again. You look behind you at the keep. The kitchens, the stables, the workshops, the sleeping quarters, the wells, the stores, and all the people who have spent days turning ordinary routines into preparation. Dover is becoming less of a household and more of a machine designed to endure. Soon the enemy will stand close enough to test every wall, every gate, every barrel of grain, and every person within them, and the waiting will finally end. The waiting ends with sound. Not one great theatrical crash, but a sequence of smaller signals. A horn from the wall, shouting near the gate, boot striking stone. Then another call from farther along the defences. You are already moving before you fully understand why. Men climb toward the wall walks. Servants pull carts and baskets away from busy passages. A boy carrying water nearly collides with a crossbowman running in the opposite direction. The castle that spent days preparing now begins using what it prepared. Outside. The enemy has come close enough to matter. You reach the wall and look down. The landscape below no longer seems empty. Men move across the approaches in groups. Standards lift above them. Horses appear between clusters of infantry. Wagons and equipment follow. From this height, individual faces are impossible to distinguish. That almost makes the sight worse. An army becomes a moving pattern. Prince Louis and his supporters have brought the war directly to Dover. The siege of 1216 forms one of the most famous episodes in the castle's medieval history. Louis controlled much of southeastern England and had powerful baronial support. But Dover remained loyal to King John under Hubert de Burgh. Taking it would remove a major obstacle on the route between France and Louis's English campaign, so the attackers settle in, and you remain behind the walls. That distinction matters. A siege is partly a battle of location. The people outside want to come in. You would quite like them not to. A crossbowman beside you sets a bolt in place. Another man watches the range. Nobody fires yet. The defenders conserve ammunition until targets are worthwhile. Below, enemy troops begin organising positions beyond easy reach. Some prepare missile weapons, others work with timber. A number disappear behind folds in the ground. It is difficult to tell what they are constructing. That uncertainty produces its own anxiety. You cannot watch every attacker at once. The first missiles arrive later. One passes high enough that you hear it rather than see it. A sharp movement through the air. Then a hard impact somewhere behind you. Men turn. Nobody appears injured. Someone shouts an order. Another missile follows. This one strikes stone. The sound is much smaller than you expect. Not an explosion. A violent crack. Fragments scatter. Dust lifts briefly from the wall. The siege has begun properly now. You crouch lower. The crossbowman beside you seems considerably less impressed than you are. He waits, then fires. The mechanism snaps. The bolt vanishes downward. You do not see where it lands. He immediately begins spanning the weapon again. There is something unsettlingly mechanical about the process. Load, aim, release, reload. The wall around you fills with repetition. Archers and crossbowmen fire when opportunities appear, men bring more missiles, others watch for vulnerable positions. Officers move along the defences giving instructions. Nobody stands dramatically on the highest point shouting speeches. Anyone attempting that would make an excellent target. You keep your head down. It feels sensible. The attackers do not simply throw missiles at the walls and hope Dover becomes emotionally exhausted. Siege warfare relies on pressure. Engineers examine weaknesses, troops probe approaches, siege engines can batter or bombard fortifications. Missile troops try to make defenders abandon exposed positions if a wall, tower, or gateway can be damaged. The attackers may concentrate their effort there. Dover's defences are powerful, but powerful does not mean indestructible. Stone can fracture, timber burns, earth shifts, men become tired. A castle is strong because many systems work together. A siege tries to make those systems fail one at a time. You leave the exposed wall briefly and descend toward the ward. The difference below is remarkable. People who are not fighting are still working. Water moves upward. Food moves toward assigned areas. Wounded men are guided away from the defences when necessary. Tools are carried toward repair crews. Messengers run between positions. A kitchen worker appears with bread and ale. Several soldiers eat standing up. You recognise one of them from the dice game yesterday. He chews with his eyes still fixed toward the wall. Apparently war has not improved the catering schedule. The castle is more crowded now. People avoid exposed spaces where possible. Every passage seems to contain someone carrying something. A servant presses himself against a doorway while armed men hurry past. Two workers push a cart of stones toward a defensive position. A priest moves through the ward. A horse becomes agitated by the noise and has to be restrained. Then another impact shakes dust from a nearby surface. Everyone pauses, only for a heartbeat. Then movement resumes. You begin to notice the dust. It appears after every strike on masonry. Fine pale powder settles on clothing. Tiny fragments collect near damaged sections. Masons inspect cracks and broken surfaces as soon as they safely can. Temporary repairs may involve timber, rubble, earth, or whatever suitable materials are available. A siege is destructive engineering followed immediately by emergency engineering. The attackers try to create openings. The defenders try to make those openings inconvenient. You climb again, this time to a different section. From here you can see enemy activity more clearly. Large wooden equipment is being positioned. Siege machines are not identical mechanical monsters built from a single medieval blueprint. Their forms and capabilities vary, and chroniclers frequently use broad terms that can be frustrating to interpret centuries later. What precisely stood outside each section of Dover at every stage cannot be reconstructed with perfect confidence. Descriptions survive, and the damage associated with the siege is real enough. But later rebuilding altered the fortress extensively. The stone you might inspect in another century has already lived several lives. From your position in 1216, though, the only relevant question is whether the incoming missile will hit you. Another one arrives. You hear men shout. The projectile strikes somewhere near a defensive structure. Wood splinters. A section of timber shifts. A soldier ducks instinctively. Someone laughs afterward. Not because it is funny, because fear sometimes escapes through strange doors. Then the defenders respond. Bolts and arrows descend. Stones may be dropped or thrown at attackers who venture close enough. Men exploit the advantage of height. Every approach beneath the walls becomes dangerous. This is why attackers need protection. Shields, screens, earthworks, timber coverings, and careful use of terrain can reduce exposure. The siege becomes a contest of geometry. Who can see whom? Who can reach whom? Where is the dead ground beneath a wall? Where can a machine operate? Where can defenders concentrate fire? You had perhaps expected medieval combat to feel chaotic. It does. But underneath the chaos is calculation. By evening, the castle feels physically altered. Damaged timber lies near one wall. Fresh stone chips cover a part of a walkway. A section has been reinforced. One doorway is now kept closed. Guards stand where none stood yesterday, and inside the stores, another calculation has begun. Food, not hunger yet. Just numbers. You follow a servant carrying empty sacks and pass a clerk speaking quietly with a household officer. The conversation concerns consumption. How much grain was issued? How many people are being fed? How much ale remains in one store? How quickly is fodder disappearing? The siege may last days or weeks. Nobody inside knows. That transformed eating into arithmetic. Meals continue, but extravagance becomes foolish. Bread matters more than presentation. Preserved food becomes precious. Fresh provisions cannot be assumed to arrive tomorrow morning. Even animals become part of the calculation. A horse consumes resources every day, whether it has performed useful work or spent 12 hours staring at a wall. The fortress has prepared stocks, yet no storehouse feels infinite once the gates effectively separate you from the countryside. A kitchen servant tells another that portions may be watched more carefully. The second man looks offended, as though Prince Louis has personally stolen part of his supper. This may be the most relatable reaction to war you have seen. Night approaches. The gates remain shut. The enemy remains outside. And only now does the deeper reality settle into you. Yesterday, you could imagine leaving, walking down the road, finding shelter elsewhere, returning when the danger passed. That option has vanished. The roads are controlled by hostile forces. The approaches are watched. A lone person slipping from the castle risks capture or worse. Your stone refuge is also your boundary. You look through a narrow opening toward fires appearing in the enemy camp below. Dozens, then more. Small orange points spread through the darkness. The attackers are not going home. Behind you, the castle lights its own fires. Guards take their positions. Food is issued. Damaged defences are checked once more. The first day of real siege settles into night, and all around you, Dover begins learning the rhythm of being trapped. Morning brings no relief from the enemy camp below. When you return to the wall, smoke still rises from fires beyond the defences. Men move among tents and timber structures. Horses are led between groups. Equipment shifts slowly into new positions. The siege has settled in. That changes the defenders too. You begin to notice not simply soldiers, but different kinds of soldiers. A knight passes wearing mail beneath a surcoat. Behind him comes a man carrying a crossbow. Another holds a spear. Two labourers drag a bundle of timber. A clerk follows an officer while protecting a piece of parchment from the wind. Then a priest appears, speaking quietly with a tired soldier near the stair. This is what defence actually looks like, not one heroic class of warrior. A collection of people whose skills overlap just enough to keep the fortress alive. At the centre of that network stands Hubert de Burgh. You do not see him posing dramatically against the sunrise. You see the consequences of his command instead. Messengers move toward particular towers. Guards rotate. Repairs receive priorities. Stores are checked. Men are sent where pressure is greatest. Hubert has served King John in several important roles, and by 1216 he is one of the king's most dependable officials. His defence of Dover will become a major part of his reputation, but reputation is tidy. Command is not. A commander receives incomplete information. Someone reports movement on one side of the castle. Another says a wall has suffered damage. A clerk wants approval for supplies. A crossbow officer requests more bolts. A servant reports trouble with water distribution. A messenger arrives with news from outside that may already be old. All of these problems compete for attention. You begin to understand why medieval command requires trusted subordinates. Hubert cannot inspect every stone personally. He needs knights and experienced retainers to supervise sections of the defence. He needs sergeants to maintain discipline. He needs specialists who understand weapons. He needs workers who can repair what the enemy damages. Even the most loyal commander is useless if everybody beneath him waits for individual instructions. On the wall, a knight speaks with several men assigned to his section. His equipment marks him as wealthier than many around him. Mail is expensive. A good sword is expensive. A warhorse can cost more than an ordinary labourer would imagine spending on almost anything. Yet wealth does not make him immune to fatigue. His eyes are red. Dust covers part of his clothing. He has probably slept badly. The glamorous knight of later romance would be disappointed. The real man wants breakfast. You follow him toward a sheltered position where bread and ale are being distributed. There are no shining plates, no ceremonial goblets. He eats quickly, nearby. Lower-ranking soldiers do the same for a few minutes. Hierarchy becomes less visible because everyone is chewing. Then an officer calls. The knight stands immediately. Rank returns. You move toward the crossbowmen. Their weapons demand different habits from swords or spears. A sword may remain at a man's side for hours without action. A crossbow in a siege becomes part of a continuing system. Bolts have to reach the shooting position. Strings must remain usable. Mechanical parts require attention. Men need protected places from which to load and fire. Targets must be chosen carefully. A skilled crossbowman can threaten exposed attackers at distances where hand weapons are irrelevant. This makes him valuable. It can also make him a priority target. One man waits behind stone until another defender calls out. He rises, aims, fires, then disappears below the parapet again. No flourish, no heroic pause. He understands that the enemy can shoot back. Some professional crossbowmen in this era are highly specialized and may serve rulers far from their places of origin. Mercenary service is common enough that military forces can contain men whose strongest connection to one another is wages and obligation rather than local identity. You listen to accents around the wall. Not everyone sounds the same. That feels entirely plausible in a royal fortress linked to wider networks of service. Exactly where each defender came from is another matter. The records do not hand you a convenient roster with birthplace, age, and occupation for every man present during each phase of the siege. A few prominent names rise clearly from the documentation, while many ordinary participants disappear into collective terms such as knights, sergeants, or crossbowmen. So you reconstruct the crowd cautiously. Some are local, some may have served elsewhere, some are experienced. Some are learning very quickly. One young soldier proves the last point. He carries a bundle of bolts toward a firing position and nearly slips on broken stone. An older man catches his arm. No lecture follows. The older soldier simply points to the safer route. The younger one nods. Training during a siege sometimes lasts about 3 seconds. You descend to where repair crews are working. Here, fighting becomes almost invisible. A mason examines fresh damage. A carpenter cuts timber. Labourers fill containers with rubble and earth. Their clothes offer little resemblance to military costume. Yet if they stop, the defenders lose options. Siege warfare consumes structures. A damaged doorway may need bracing. A shattered timber feature must be replaced. A weakened wall may need reinforcement before another assault. The enemy creates problems with engines and manpower. These men answer with hammers. You watch one carpenter strike a wooden peg into place. Again, again. The rhythm is almost soothing. Then a missile impacts somewhere above and everybody looks up. The carpenter waits. Silence. He resumes hammering. There is a stubbornness in that gesture more impressive than shouting. Near another building. Smith still with metalwork. A weapon with damaged fittings comes in. A tool leaves sharpened. Nails and hardware become military necessities. A fortress depends on iron in hundreds of quiet places. Hinges, locks, chains, weapon points, harness fittings, tools, fastenings. If you ever wanted proof that war involves logistics, watch someone panic because there are not enough nails. A priest walks past you again. His role is not technical, but it matters. Men facing death may seek confession. They may attend mass. They may ask for blessings. Religious observance is woven into ordinary medieval life long before danger appears, and siege conditions can intensify that need. The priest speaks with a crossbowman who looks exhausted. You cannot hear the words. You do not need to. Not every defender carries fear the same way. Some joke, some pray, some become irritable, some talk constantly, others become almost silent. One man rubs a small object between his fingers while watching the enemy camp. Perhaps a cross, perhaps a token, perhaps something connected to home. Tiny personal possessions can mean more during a crisis than grand equipment. A ring, a charm, a scrap of cloth, a small religious object. Things easy to carry and difficult to explain. They remind you that the defenders are not merely military units. They have families, debts, promises, private fears, favourite foods, people waiting elsewhere. The chroniclers who later described Dover have little room for any of that. A campaign narrative needs victories, commanders, assaults, and political consequences. It does not need to tell you which soldier misses his daughter. But he probably does. You return to the wall. An officer is speaking with a group of men near a damaged section. Hubert's instructions have reached them through several layers of command. That itself is worth noticing. Successful defense requires information to survive the journey from decision to action. A command misunderstood is almost as dangerous as no command at all. Signals help. Bells, horns, shouted instructions, messengers moving through protected routes. Different sounds can warn of different kinds of trouble. You hear a horn now. Men turn toward the western defences. Another call follows. Movement begins immediately. Crossbowmen reposition. Labourers clear the walkway. A knight runs past you. The attack below is shifting. Through an opening, you see men approaching under protection. The defenders respond. Bolts descend. Orders echo. Stones are moved toward the threatened point. Then you notice something else. Not every defender is heading toward the wall. Some remain at stores, some guard gates, some continue repairs elsewhere. Some keep watch on approaches that appear quiet. That restraint matters. A clever attacker may create noise in one place to draw strength away from another, so the castle cannot simply rush everyone toward the loudest problem. Defense demands patience even during panic. For the next hour, the pressure rises and falls. The attackers test, the defenders answer. No decisive breach comes. Eventually the movement below recedes. Men along the wall relax by tiny degrees. Nobody celebrates. The knight you saw earlier sits against stone and drinks. A crossbowman checks his string. The carpenter below is still hammering. Hubert's strength lies not in one magnificent moment, but in keeping all these people working together, knight and labourer, crossbowman and clerk, priest and porter, officer and servant. Each supports the others in ways a heroic story tends to flatten, and beneath their feet. Another group of specialists is about to enter a much darker contest, because when stone walls resist attack from above, the enemy can begin thinking about what lies underneath them. The first sign of trouble beneath the ground is not dramatic, it is vibration. You're standing near a damaged section of the defences when a man beside you pauses, tilts his head, and presses one hand against the stone. For a moment, you hear nothing, then there it is, a faint dull knocking, not from above, from somewhere below. The sound comes again, soft, measured, deep enough that you almost imagine it. The soldier beside you does not. He calls for an officer. Within minutes, several men are gathered near the same place. Listening, the siege has moved underground. When attackers cannot easily break a strong wall from the outside, they can try to weaken what supports it. Mining is one of the most dangerous techniques available to a medieval besieger. Men dig tunnels toward the foundations of walls or towers, often supporting the passage with timber as they advance. Once enough earth has been removed, the supports may be burned or otherwise destroyed. If everything works as intended, part of the structure above loses support. Stone does not negotiate well with gravity. The defenders know this. That is why they begin digging too. You're led toward a cramped work area where picks, baskets, lamps, rope, and timber have been gathered. Nothing here resembles the bright romantic image of medieval warfare. There are no banners, no shining helmets, only dirt. A great deal of dirt. A labourer hands you a small lamp. The flame seems suddenly inadequate. You descend. The first passage is narrow enough to force you to stoop. Earth presses close on both sides. Timber braces support sections of the roof. The smell is thick with soil, sweat, lamp smoke, damp wood, and the stale air of too many bodies working in too little space. Behind you, daylight disappears. You immediately miss it. The men ahead crawl or crouch depending on the height of the tunnel. Tools strike earth. Thunk, scrape, pause, thunk. The rhythm travels through the ground. Someone fills a basket. Another man drags it backward. A third carries the spoil away. Then another basket replaces it. Mining is not just digging forward. Every handful removed must go somewhere. The farther the tunnel extends, the more exhausting the transport becomes. You take hold of a basket. It is heavier than it looks. Wet soil has an unpleasant honesty about weight. You pass it backward. A man behind you takes it without comment. Soon another arrives, then another. After several minutes, the novelty has ended completely. You begin to understand why siege warfare consumes ordinary labour so aggressively. A tunnel can require miners, carriers, carpenters, supervisors, guards, and people supplying lamps, fuel, food, and replacement tools. A single military idea creates an entire underground household. The sound ahead changes. One miner stops digging. Everyone listens. A faint tapping answers through the earth, different from your own rhythm. Enemy work. The silence in the tunnel becomes uncomfortable. Nobody needs to explain what it means. The attackers may be close. Countermining turns siege warfare into a blind contest. Defenders can try to determine where enemy miners are working by sound, vibration, local knowledge of terrain, or carefully dug intercepting galleries. Sometimes containers of water are said to have been used to detect vibration, with ripples revealing movement in the ground. Whether every clever method described in later military writing was actually used at Dover in exactly this fashion is impossible to establish. But listening matters. Right now, everyone is doing it. A man places his ear near the earth. Another holds the lamp away so the flame's movement does not distract him. Nothing. Then 3 distant knocks. The miner points. The digging angle changes. You continue. The passage grows warmer. That surprises you. Outside, Dover's wind made you long for shelter. Down here, still air traps body heat. Sweat forms beneath your clothing. Dust clings to your face. Breathing feels heavier. The lamp flame consumes oxygen too, though nobody here would explain the danger in modern chemical language. They know bad air through experience. A flame that burns poorly can warn of trouble. A worker who becomes dizzy is another warning. Ventilation matters even when the science behind it is not fully understood. You glance at your lamp with new suspicion. It flickers. You decide not to stare at it. The carpenter behind the miners begins placing another timber support. This is skilled work. The roof must remain stable long enough for the tunnel to reach its purpose. Too little support and the passage may collapse prematurely. Too much timber slows progress and consumes valuable material. The enemy outside is solving the same problem. 2 groups of men are crawling toward one another through darkness, while each hopes to bring part of the castle down first. It is difficult to imagine a less relaxing occupation. The digging continues. Stone appears in the soil. Progress slows. Tools change. A miner uses a smaller implement to work around harder material. Another wedges something loose. Fragments are passed backward. You notice the workers communicating in short phrases. There is little wasted speech. The tunnel itself enforces concentration. Then someone raises a hand. Silence. This time the sound is unmistakable. Scraping. Very close. The enemy miners are somewhere beyond the wall of earth ahead. You feel your stomach tighten. No one rushes forward. The officer whispers instructions. Several armed men are brought nearer. If the tunnels meet, underground fighting can follow. Imagine combat where you cannot stand upright, where your weapon catches on timber, where the only light comes from fragile lamps, where you cannot easily retreat because 5 men are behind you in a tunnel barely wide enough for one. You would probably choose almost any other battlefield. A miner resumes work cautiously. Small amounts of earth are removed. Everyone watches. The scraping from the other side stops. Perhaps they heard you. Perhaps they are listening too, for a few minutes. Both sides seem to be holding their breath. Then a dull thud shakes loose soil from the roof. The timber creaks. Nobody moves. The roof holds. Someone mutters a prayer. Work continues. Dover's siege is famous for serious attacks against its outer defences, including mining operations associated with the destruction or capture of important defensive works. The exact sequence, dimensions, and location of every subterranean action are difficult to map perfectly onto the later castle, because generations of rebuilding have changed the landscape. You're standing inside that uncertainty. The tunnel you imagine is plausible, because the method is known. The fear requires no reconstruction at all. Hours pass strangely underground. There is no sun to measure, only lamp oil, fatigue, baskets, and changes of workers. Fresh men replace exhausted ones. Food is passed down. Water arrives in small quantities. The miners drink quickly. Nobody wastes it. You eventually crawl back toward the entrance. The first breath of outside air feels astonishingly clean, even though it carries smoke, animals, and the usual castle smells. You straighten slowly. Your back objects, above ground. The siege continues as though nothing unusual has happened. Crossbows snap from the walls. Men shout. A hammer rings against damaged timber. A cook carries bread toward the defenders. Yet beneath all of it, the earth is being hollowed. Every person walking across the ward now seems unaware of how uncertain the ground beneath them might become. You look toward the great stone structures rising above Dover. They seem impossibly heavy. That's precisely the problem. If enough support disappears below them, all that strength becomes weight as evening approaches. Word spreads quietly that the enemy miners have made progress in one sector. There is no panic, just more digging, more timber, more men sent below, and as darkness settles over the fortress, the castle's prayers begin to sound a little more urgent. Because when the walls above you can crack and the earth beneath you can move, there is one remaining place many people inside Dover turn for stability: the chapel. The chapel is quieter than the rest of the fortress, but not silent. Nothing in Dover is truly silent now. Even here, beneath the murmur of prayer, you can hear the siege continuing beyond the walls, a distant impact, footsteps in a passage, a door closing, then the low voice of the priest resumes. You step inside. The air smells different from the ward. Wax, cold stone, old timber, perhaps incense lingering faintly from an earlier service. The light is warmer too, gathered around candles rather than spread evenly through the room, for men who have spent hours listening to stone crack and timber splinter. The chapel offers something the walls cannot: meaning. That matters enormously in 1216. Religion is not an occasional private interest tucked around the edges of medieval life. It shapes calendars, oaths, burial, marriage, law, charity, kingship, warfare, ideas of illness, and the way people understand danger itself. Inside a besieged castle, faith becomes even more immediate. A soldier kneels near the front. His helmet rests beside him. Mud marks his clothing. His hands are clasped tightly. Perhaps he's praying for survival. Perhaps for his family. Perhaps for forgiveness. Perhaps for all three. You sit farther back. The priest speaks softly with another man near the wall. Confession can carry particular urgency before battle. Medieval Christians live with the expectation that death may come suddenly, and that the state of the soul matters beyond the body. A siege offers many opportunities to remember this. A missile does not schedule an appointment. A wall does not warn you politely before collapsing. So men prepare spiritually as well as militarily. The sacraments provide structure where events do not. Mass continues. Prayers continue. The liturgical calendar continues. Even military emergencies do not erase the sacred rhythm of the year. Dover Castle itself has deep religious associations. Within the great keep is a chapel dedicated to St. Thomas Becket, whose murder in Canterbury Cathedral in 1170 transformed him into one of medieval England's most important saints. That dedication carries special weight here. Henry II, who ordered the great keep built, had become forever entangled with Becket's death. The chapel therefore brings royal power, penitence, memory, and architecture into one space. You look toward the altar. A soldier nearby may know the story differently from a scholar 8 centuries later, but he certainly knows Becket's name. Pilgrims travel to Canterbury. Miracle stories circulate. Saints are not abstract historical figures in this world. They are active intercessors. People ask for help. A person facing danger may appeal to the Virgin Mary, Christ, a favourite saint, or the patron associated with a place or personal devotion. A small object appears in the hand of the man beside you, a cross, plain, worn smooth around the edges. He rubs it with his thumb. You remember the soldier on the wall doing something similar. Perhaps this is how fear becomes manageable. Not eliminated, contained. The priest begins another prayer. Several men respond. Their voices do not match perfectly. Nobody seems concerned. Outside. Another impact sounds. One candle flame trembles. Nobody leaves. For a few moments. The strange contrast becomes almost soothing. Stone is being attacked. Men are praying inside stone. The same walls that serve military defence also contain sacred space. Medieval people do not need to separate those functions as sharply as you might. A fortress can contain kitchens, bedrooms, stores, latrines, administrative rooms, and a chapel without anyone finding the combination odd. Human life requires all of them. Even holiness needs somebody to replace the candles. You notice a servant doing exactly that. He moves quietly along the side of the chapel, collecting spent wax and tending lights. Wax itself carries hierarchy. Beeswax candles burn more cleanly and pleasantly than cheaper tallow lights, but wax costs more. Important religious and elite settings can therefore glow with an expensive material that ordinary households use more sparingly. The scraps are valuable enough not to waste casually. A servant may collect remnants for reuse. Nothing disappears simply because it looked beautiful while burning. Nearby hangs fabric that softens part of the stone interior. There may be painted decoration as well, though later centuries will alter much of what you would see in 1216. The medieval chapel is not necessarily the bare grey chamber. Modern ruins encourage you to imagine. Colour belongs here. Painted surfaces belong here. Textiles belong here. Metalwork catches candlelight. The Middle Ages are considerably less beige than their surviving stone suggests. Someone has left a small devotional token near a sacred image. Perhaps an offering. Perhaps a personal request made visible. Objects like these can carry extraordinary emotional importance despite being materially simple. A bit of wax, a pin, a coin, a badge acquired from a pilgrimage shrine, a fragment of something associated with a holy place, and then there are relics. The medieval Christian world treats physical connections to saints with profound seriousness. Bones, cloth, containers associated with holy remains, and objects believed to possess sacred associations can draw pilgrims across kingdoms. A modern visitor might instinctively separate belief from object. People around you do not. Sacred presence can inhabit matter. That idea makes a relic particularly comforting in a place where matter itself is under attack. Stone fails, timber burns, bodies weaken. The holy is supposed to endure. A priest approaches one of the defenders. They speak quietly. You hear only the final blessing. The soldier rises. He looks no less tired than before, but he seems steadier. Then he picks up his helmet and returns toward the wall. Faith does not remove duty. It sends him back to it. You remain seated. The siege outside becomes momentarily distant. Your attention drifts toward the stories passing through the castle. Someone claims a strange light was seen over Canterbury. Someone else insists a saint appeared in a dream to a wounded man. Another says a relic protected a nearby church from destruction. Are these reports believed? Some are doubted. Medieval people are perfectly capable of skepticism. Though the boundaries of the plausible are different from yours, a miracle story does not automatically convince everyone, nor does unusual behavior automatically become a miracle. Clergy themselves can investigate claims cautiously, yet under pressure. Stories spread quickly because people need explanations. You heard the same process with rumors of spies. Now the mechanism serves hope instead of suspicion. One tale grows during retelling. A soldier survives an impact. By supper, his survival becomes extraordinary. By morning, someone remembers that he had prayed to a particular saint after another week. Perhaps the saint has personally redirected the missile. Human memory is excellent at improving narrative structure. The formal record does not tell you exactly which rumours passed through Dover's chapel during the siege. It cannot. Most conversations vanished the moment they ended. Even the rhythm of worship within the fortress has to be rebuilt from broader medieval practice. Surviving architecture, household organisation, and the scattered evidence attached to royal chapels. The gaps are especially large when you ask what ordinary soldiers actually felt. A chronicler can tell you that defenders resisted. He cannot easily tell you which man cried during confession. You have to leave space for that silence. A bell sounds. Men nearby rise. Some return toward their posts. Others remain. A servant carries a message through the doorway and whispers to the priest. The priest listens. His expression changes only slightly. More pressure at the defences. The chapel empties faster now. You step outside with the others. The ward seems louder after the hush within. A horse calls from the stables. A carpenter is already carrying timber. Several women move between buildings with cloth and containers. Then you notice a child standing beside a doorway, watching the armed men hurry past. The sight alters the fortress again. You have spent hours among soldiers, priests, commanders, and workers. But Dover is not populated only by adult men. Hidden behind the military story are households, dependents, wives, children, servants, traders, and displaced people whose lives continue inside the same walls, and the siege belongs to them too. The child beside the doorway does not seem frightened. Not visibly. At least, he watches soldiers hurry across the ward with a serious concentration children often give to things adults wish they would ignore. A woman reaches for his shoulder and guides him back from the traffic, before a man carrying timber nearly walks into him. The boy disappears indoors for a moment. The military story of Dover opens wider. You have spent days noticing armed men, officers, craftsmen, priests, and servants. Yet a fortress of this size also contains people whose presence rarely dominates the chronicles. Women, children, household dependents, visitors, traders, refugees, people attached to soldiers or officials, people who simply happen to be inside when the gates close. Their lives continue between the alarms. You follow the woman and child into a lower domestic space where several people are working close together. A small fire burns, cloth hangs from a line, a basket sits beside the wall. Someone is mending a garment. Another woman sorts dried food into smaller containers. There is no grand furniture here, just the practical possessions of people trying to make a temporary space livable. The siege has compressed ordinary life. A room that might once have served a handful of people may now hold more. Bedding is folded during the day to create space. Personal belongings stay close. Children are told repeatedly not to wander. That last instruction seems especially optimistic. One girl slips toward the doorway anyway. An older woman catches her with impressive efficiency and turns her around without interrupting the conversation. You suspect this is not the first attempt. Women living inside medieval castles do far more than sit beside windows waiting for knights. Elite women may manage households, supervise servants, control property, arrange supplies, handle correspondence, care for children, and participate in political networks. Women of lower status cook, wash, mend, carry water, prepare food, tend animals, assist trades, sell goods, and perform endless forms of labour that rarely receive detailed narrative attention. Under siege, those activities do not vanish, they become harder. You notice it in the laundry. There is less space to dry cloth. Water use is more carefully watched. Fuel matters. A woman examines a child's tunic and decides a tear can be repaired rather than replaced. Needles are precious enough to keep track of. Thread is wound carefully. Clothing represents work. Wool must be produced, fibres prepared, yarn spun, cloth woven, garments cut and stitched. Losing a cloak is not the medieval equivalent of forgetting a cheap jacket on a bus. It is an economic event. The woman pushes the needle through cloth. The child beside her watches, perhaps learning. Skills pass this way, not through manuals, through hands. You sit nearby and listen. Conversation moves from food to rumours and then back to food, which feels entirely reasonable. Someone has heard that supplies will be reduced. Someone else says that is nonsense. A third person says the kitchen's already changed portions yesterday. Nobody knows exactly. The same uncertainty you heard among soldiers reaches these rooms too. Military information does not remain neatly military. It arrives through servants, through husbands, through children who overhear adults, through a clerk's assistant who tells a cook, who tells a laundress, who tells everyone. By the end of the chain, one missing barrel can become starvation by Friday. A baby begins crying. The sound cuts through the room. No one appears surprised. A mother lifts the infant and settles against the wall, rocking slowly, for her. The siege includes feeding schedules, sleep deprivation, and keeping a child warm while missiles strike stone outside. History has an unfortunate habit of describing danger in adult male terms. Children do not experience less danger. They merely understand it differently. A sudden impact sounds beyond the building. Dust falls lightly from a beam. The baby stops crying for half a second, then resumes with greater determination. Someone laughs quietly, not because the danger is amusing, because the baby has apparently decided Prince Louis is less important than hunger. The mother adjusts her clothing and begins feeding the child. Life continues. There is something almost defiant about it. Birth, feeding, washing, arguments, games, illness, and boredom all continue even when commanders would prefer the entire population to behave like a military diagram. You follow a servant outside again. Several women cross the ward carrying baskets. One appears connected to kitchen work. Another carries folded cloth. A younger girl follows with a jug. There is nothing unusual about children contributing to household labour in this world. Young people can be given errands, assist with animals, gather materials, carry messages, help prepare food, or learn skilled work through apprenticeship and imitation. The modern boundary between childhood and adult responsibility is softer here. You see it again near the stable. A boy brushes mud from a horse while an older groom watches. The animal is enormous beside him. The boy works carefully. When the horse shifts, he moves without panic. He has done this before, perhaps for years, across the yard. Two children have invented a game with stones. One tosses a small piece against a wall and tries to catch another before retrieving it. The rules are obscure. The seriousness is absolute. A soldier walks around them rather than through them. For a few minutes, the siege disappears from their world. Then a horn sounds. Adults react immediately. The children freeze. Someone calls them indoors. The game ends. The stones remain where they fell. You watch the door close behind them. How many children are inside Dover during this phase? No neat figure survives. Even the presence of women and dependents has to be inferred from the nature of castle households. Scattered administrative references, broader social practice, and the simple reality that major medieval fortresses were inhabited communities rather than barracks occupied only by fighting men. Later storytelling simplifies sieges because simplicity helps. Defenders on one side, attackers on the other, but lived space resists simplicity. A fortress can shelter a knight and his servant, a clerk and his wife, a laundress, a merchant trapped by events, a child belonging to someone in the household, perhaps people from nearby who sought safety before the enemy closed in. The precise balance changes according to circumstance. That uncertainty does not make them less real. It makes them harder to count. Near a storage building, a woman argues with a man over grain. Her tone is controlled. His is defensive. You catch enough to understand that she believes her household received less than expected. He explains that distributions have changed. She asks whether soldiers are receiving more. He replies that he follows orders. She does not look impressed by the existence of orders. Eventually she accepts a smaller measure and walks away. Siege economics has entered domestic life. Every household notices shortages differently. A soldier sees fewer rations. A mother sees less food for children. A cook sees ingredients disappearing faster. A groom sees fodder shrinking. A merchant sees goods gaining value. A commander sees time. The same sack of grain becomes several different problems depending on who is looking. You move toward a sheltered corner where an elderly woman is sitting with 2 children. She tells them a story. You cannot hear every word. Something about a saint. Something about a traveller. Perhaps a miracle. Perhaps a moral lesson. The children listen because stories fill the spaces fear leaves behind. This oral world is vast and mostly lost. Songs, prayers, jokes, folk tales, family memories, warnings, little rhymes for children. Almost none can be confidently tied to this exact courtyard on this exact day. But silence would be the less believable reconstruction. People talk, they always have, and during a siege, words become another kind of shelter. A woman might promise a child that the walls are too strong for anyone to enter. Does she believe it? Perhaps, perhaps not. The child only needs her to sound certain. Evening comes gradually. Families and servants withdraw towards sleeping spaces. A woman carries a sleepy toddler. 2 girls share a piece of bread. A boy runs back for the stones from his abandoned game before someone scolds him and sends him inside. The ward quiets slightly, yet near the stores. Activity continues. Barrels are being checked again. A clerk holds a lamp over a tally. Someone measures grain. A merchant waits to discuss payment. War has not stopped commerce. It has made commerce more important. Every candle, sack, horseshoe, bolt of cloth, handful of salt, and load of firewood now has to be found, priced, moved, guarded, and used carefully, and as the domestic rooms settle for another uneasy night, you follow the clerks toward the supplies that determine how long all these hidden households can remain behind the walls. The clerk lifts his lamp closer to the tally. Numbers sit in neat little lines across the parchment. They do not look dangerous. Yet almost everything happening inside Dover now depends on them. How many sacks remain? How much grain was issued today? How many horses still require fodder? How much salt is left? How many candles can be spared? How much wine belongs to officers? How much ale to the wider household? And how quickly are both disappearing? The siegers turned arithmetic into survival. You stand near the storage area while 2 men examine a barrel. One taps the side, another checks the seal. A third writes something down. Nobody smiles. There is nothing dramatic about the scene, but the importance is obvious. Dover cannot eat its walls. A fortress survives only if supplies continue to support the people defending it. Grain is among the most valuable resources because it can feed many people in several forms. It becomes bread, pottage, thickened dishes, and other basic foods. Salt preserves meat and fish. Dried peas and beans travel well. Cheese keeps longer than fresh milk. Ale provides both calories and a familiar daily drink. Firewood cooks all of it. Then there are the less obvious necessities: lamp fuel, rope, nails, leather, cloth, wax, pitch, iron fittings, horseshoes, replacement handles for tools. A siege can be lost because grand defences fail. It can also become miserable because someone runs out of string. You follow the clerk toward another building where goods are being inspected. A merchant waits beside several bundles of cloth. He looks irritated. Perhaps he has been waiting for payment. That expression, at least, has survived perfectly into the modern world. The cloth matters more than you might expect. Garments tear, bandages are needed. Bedding wears out, sacks must be patched. Protective coverings may be improvised, strips of fabric become ties, wrappings, filters, padding, and repairs. Material rarely has only one purpose. The same applies to leather, belts, shoes, harnesses, straps, pouches, weapon fittings, and countless smaller objects rely on it. A damaged leather strap sounds trivial until it is the strap holding part of your equipment together. The merchant argues quietly with an official overprice. Wars made his goods more valuable. The castle authorities would prefer him not to notice. He has noticed. Markets do not disappear during military emergencies. They become distorted. Scarcity pushes prices upward. Risk increases transport costs. Merchants may demand compensation for entering dangerous areas. Local producers lose access to usual buyers. Military buyers compete with households. Coins move through hands more quickly in some places and disappear entirely in others. A siege creates its own small economy. Dover's position makes this especially important. The castle depends not only on what lies within its walls, but on wider networks reaching through Kent, the Channel coast, royal estates, ports, merchants, and administrative officers. Before the siege tightens completely, provisions can be collected from surrounding lands or brought by sea. Afterward, every route becomes uncertain. You step outside and look toward the coast. A ship out there could mean food, or troops, or news, or danger. The narrow channel that made Dover strategically important also makes maritime supply possible, at least when ships can approach safely and the enemy does not control the relevant waters. This is one reason the wider campaign matters so much. A castle rarely exists as an isolated stone island. Its survival depends on roads, ports, villages, farms, storehouses, markets, and political loyalties far beyond the walls. You return to the ward. A butcher is inspecting livestock. Several animals have been brought inside or kept within defended spaces. They represent fresh meat, but also ongoing consumption. Feed an animal long enough and it consumes grain or fodder that humans might need. Slaughter it too early and you lose future value. There is no perfect answer. A commander facing a long siege must make decisions based on how long he thinks the siege will last. That is difficult when nobody knows. One sheep looks at you with complete innocence. You feel slightly guilty. It probably does not understand economics. Nearby, sacks of oats are being allocated for horses. The stable staff guard them carefully. War horses, riding horses, pack animals, and cart animals all require enormous amounts of feed compared with humans. They also need water. A horse may consume many pounds of fodder in a day. Multiply that by dozens of animals and suddenly the storage problem becomes less theoretical. The groom you met earlier is arguing for more hay. The storekeeper says there is not enough to issue freely. The horse beside them chews what remains of its current ration. Again, admirable neutrality. Money complicates matters further. Soldiers expect wages. Craftsmen expect wages. Merchants expect payment. Carters expect payment. People who work under royal authority may accept obligations for a time, but loyalty becomes increasingly uncomfortable when compensation fails. The English crown in John's reign had developed a sophisticated administrative machinery for raising. recording, and directing money. Even if political chaos could disrupt everything on the ground, royal orders could command supplies, sheriffs could be instructed to gather resources, officials could account for expenditure. But parchment does not magically create grain. Someone still has to grow it, someone has to transport it, someone has to risk bringing it through contested territory. The clerk pauses over another account. There is something pleasingly strange about the survival of medieval financial records. A chronicler may describe a siege in dramatic language and then move on. An account can preserve the price of rope. For understanding daily life, the rope may be just as useful. It reveals what people needed, it reveals what they paid, it sometimes reveals what suddenly became scarce. The great political struggle of 1216 leaves behind shadows in ordinary transactions, a request for more bolts, a payment to a carpenter, a delivery of grain, a charge for transporting timber. Each is a tiny pressure point in the larger crisis. You pass another merchant carrying small sacks, salt, perhaps, or spices, or dried goods. Imported spices still circulate through elite households even in wartime, though nobody sensible would prioritize cinnamon over flour during a serious shortage. Luxury does not vanish instantly, it fades unevenly. An officer may still receive wine while a labourer drinks ale. A high-status table may still offer better meat while lower households stretch pottage. Hierarchy survives scarcity for a surprisingly long time. That can produce resentment. You hear it in muttered conversations. Some believe officers receive too much. Others insist rank brings greater responsibility and therefore deserves better provision. Someone claims a noble household still has sugar. Nobody can prove this. The rumour grows anyway. There is something timeless about becoming angry over another person's dessert. The documentary trail cannot tell you exactly how every commodity was distributed within Dover from day to day during the siege. Surviving accounts illuminate parts of the royal supply system, but wartime improvisation often happens faster than formal record keeping. Some transactions leave clear traces, others dissolve into orders, oral arrangements, borrowed goods, emergency requisitions, or records that simply did not survive. You can feel those gaps around you. A sack arrives without explanation. A servant says it came from a nearby estate before the roads closed. A clerk says it belongs to the king. The cook says he does not care who owns it as long as he can use it. All three may be correct in different ways. Afternoon light begins to fade. The stores are closed more carefully now. Locks are checked. Guards are assigned. A barrel that once represented ordinary provisions now represents days of endurance. Outside, the enemy camp remains active. Inside, prices rise, portions tighten, and every object acquires a second meaning. A candle is light, a candle is money, a candle is stored fat or wax, a candle is one less night in darkness. You watch the clerk extinguish one rather than waste it. The room falls dim. Beyond the door, another messenger is arriving. This one brings different news. King John is dead. The words move quietly through the fortress at first, almost too large to understand. The man for whom Dover has resisted is gone. The siege is not. And suddenly every account, every sack of grain, every soldier's wage, and every stone wall seems tied to a political future nobody can yet see. The news of King John's death does not produce cheering. It produces silence. Men look at one another across the ward as if somebody has removed a supporting beam from the political structure above their heads. John is gone. Prince Louis is still outside. The walls are still damaged. The stores are still finite. And the defenders of Dover must decide what the king's death actually changes. For the moment, the answer is surprisingly little. The gates stay closed. The watches continue. Crossbowmen remain at their posts. Carpenters keep repairing timber. Cooks keep stretching provisions. A dead king does not make an enemy army disappear. John died in October 1216, leaving his 9-year-old son Henry as heir to a deeply divided kingdom. That succession transforms the wider struggle. Many barons who had rebelled against John can now reconsider their position, without appearing to surrender to the same ruler they had spent years opposing. A child king gives reconciliation a different shape. Inside Dover, however, politics arrives more slowly than hunger. You see that the next morning. The bread ration is still measured carefully. The horses still need fodder. A damaged section of the defences still requires work. Someone has to remove broken stone from a passage before anyone can move safely through it. Nothing about royal succession changes the weight of rubble. You help carry a basket. Again. Medieval history appears determined to make you excellent at moving inconvenient objects. The siege has already changed the castle physically. Timber is scarred. Stonework is chipped. Temporary repairs interrupt older surfaces. Certain routes are blocked or narrowed. Sections that once looked orderly now contain piles of emergency material. You walk past one wall where fresh work meets older masonry. The difference is obvious. Newer stone is brighter. Mortar remains rough. A carpenter has wedged timbers where no peaceful architect would have intended them to remain. The castle looks tired. So do the people. One soldier sits against a wall while eating. His beard has grown. His clothing is stained. He barely looks toward the enemy camp. Weeks of danger have made threat ordinary. That may be one of the strangest transformations of a siege. At first, every missile matters. Every horn tightens your stomach. Every movement outside demands attention. Later, people adapt. They learn which sounds require running. They learn which impacts are distant. They learn where it is safer to stand. Fear becomes part of routine, not gone, organized. The defenders have survived repeated pressure, including serious attacks against Dover's outer works. One of the best-known episodes involves the Northern Gateway area, where French forces gained ground after heavy assault and mining. Later generations would rebuild and strengthen the defences there, helping shape the unusual system of tunnels and works associated with the northern approaches. But standing here in 1216, you do not see a completed architectural lesson. You see damage, men discussing where stone failed, officers considering where the attackers came closest, labourers trying to make tomorrow safer than yesterday. Exactly how every phase of the first siege unfolded is difficult to arrange into one flawless sequence. Medieval narrative sources emphasize different episodes. Terminology for defensive structures can be slippery, and the castle itself was altered repeatedly after 1216. Later, masonry sometimes answers questions, sometimes it creates new ones. What is clear enough from inside the fortress is that Louis has not taken the central castle. Dover remains in Hubert de Burgh's hands, and eventually, pressure eases. At first you do not trust it. One morning there are fewer signs of movement outside. Then part of the enemy camp appears thinner. Equipment has shifted. Men who once worked near the approaches are gone. A guard points toward a distant group moving away along the road. Nobody celebrates yet. It might be deception. Sieges teach suspicion. Another day passes. More tents disappear. Carts move outward rather than inward. Scouts return with reports that confirm what your eyes already suspect. The attackers are withdrawing. The first siege is lifting. A strange mood spreads across Dover. Relief should feel cleaner than this. Instead, people seem uncertain how to behave. A soldier laughs too loudly. Another remains silent. Someone begins talking about fresh meat. A servant asks whether the gates will open immediately. An officer tells him absolutely not. The fortress has spent too long distrusting everything outside to become relaxed in an afternoon. Guards remain posted. The approaches are checked. Scouts move cautiously. Every abandoned position is treated as a possible trap. You watch men examine ground that had belonged to the attackers. There are broken materials, discarded objects, ash from fires, pieces of timber, trampled earth, perhaps damaged equipment too heavy or useless to carry away. The landscape resembles a fairground after everyone has left. If the fairground had spent several weeks trying to kill you, people begin collecting useful material. This happens almost automatically. Wood is wood, iron is iron, rope is rope. If the enemy leaves something serviceable behind, somebody inside Dover can probably find a use for it. One soldier discovers a damaged cooking vessel. He examines it seriously. A companion asks whether he intends to keep it. He says yes. Apparently the spoils of war include cookware. Nobody writes songs about this. The gates eventually open under control. Fresh air enters as though the castle has not been breathing the same atmosphere all along. People move beyond the walls cautiously. Some stare at damage, others search for familiar buildings or fields, for nearby civilians. Relief may be mixed with loss. Land around a fortress can suffer badly during siege. Crops are taken. Structures are damaged or dismantled. Animals disappear. Roads become dangerous. Military forces consume whatever they can reach. The castle has survived. That does not mean the surrounding community has escaped untouched. You follow a small group far enough to look back at Dover from outside. The fortress seems impressive again. The walls hide exhaustion remarkably well. You cannot see the sleepless guards. You cannot smell the crowded rooms. You cannot hear the arguments over grain. You cannot see the woman repairing a child's tunic or the carpenter hammering through an attack. Stone has a talent for making survival look effortless. Inside, there is cautious celebration. Ale appears, not endless quantities. Nobody has suddenly forgotten supply discipline, but enough to mark the moment. Men drink, some pray, a few embrace. One crossbowman sits alone with his cup, staring at nothing. Another searches immediately for dice. Apparently some human priorities survive military crisis perfectly intact. The game begins on a barrel top. Within minutes, someone loses money. Normality has returned. Almost. Because Dover's story in 1216 is not finished simply because one army has stepped away. Prince Louis still controls important territory. The civil war continues, and Dover remains strategically dangerous to his cause. The castle has proved that it can hold. That makes it even more important. Hubert de Burgh and his defenders have denied Louis secure control of the southeastern gateway to the kingdom, while the accession of young Henry III gives royal supporters a new political centre around which to rally across England. Loyalties begin shifting. The conflict will continue into 1217. Dover itself will face renewed pressure, but something fundamental has already been demonstrated. The fortress can endure. You climb the wall in the evening. For the first time in what feels like months, there are fewer enemy fires below. The darkness beyond Dover is darker because nobody hostile is cooking supper there. You had never imagined empty countryside could look so comforting. A guard rests his arms on the stone. He is still watching. Of course he is. Victory does not cancel the night watch. Below you, servants move through the ward. The kitchens burn, horses feed, damaged walls wait for repair. Children appear cautiously in spaces they had been told to avoid. The chapel bell sounds. Everything that existed before the siege begins knitting itself together again. Not perfectly, not quickly, but enough. You place your hand on the cold stone. It feels exactly as it did when you first arrived. You do not. And with the enemy withdrawing into the distance, you begin one final slow walk through the fortress. Past all the people whose ordinary labour made survival possible. While Dover's stones quietly keep their memories to themselves, you begin your final walk while the last light settles over Dover. The castle is quieter than it was during the siege. Although quiet here has never meant silence, a hammer still sounds somewhere near a damaged wall. Horses shift in their stalls. A servant carries a bucket across the ward. From the kitchen comes the dull knock of a wooden utensil against a pot. Ordinary life is returning through small sounds. You walk first toward the defences. Fresh repairs interrupt older stonework. Timber reinforces places weakened during the fighting. Rubble has been collected into piles for sorting and reuse. Nothing useful is wasted if it can be saved. A mason kneels beside a damaged section, fitting stone into a gap. He works slowly. There is no audience. No chronicler stands beside him recording each strike of his hammer, yet his labour matters to Dover's future as much as many of the dramatic actions that will eventually fill written histories. The castle survived because walls resisted. The walls resisted because people maintained them. You place your hand against the masonry, cold again. It is strange how familiar that sensation has become. When you first touched Dover's stone, it represented royal strength. Now you see something more complicated. Stone requires quarrying, transport, cutting, mortar, scaffolding, wages, food for workers, constant repair. Even permanence requires maintenance. You continue toward the Great Keep. It still dominates the fortress, just as it did when you arrived. Henry II's immense building remains an unmistakable statement of royal authority, but 1216 has shown how little authority can be taken for granted. King John is dead. His son Henry is a child. Prince Louis still has supporters in England. The wider war is not finished, and yet Dover remains loyal to the royal cause. That endurance will matter. Louis's inability to secure Dover prevents him from completely controlling the shortest channel route between his forces in England and support from France. The struggle continues into 1217 when further fighting on land and sea eventually destroys his chances of becoming King of England. You do not know all of that yet. For you, the future remains uncertain. You simply walk through a battered fortress that has survived its immediate ordeal, inside the keep. Servants move through the same narrow passages you climbed days earlier. A man carries firewood upstairs. You almost smile. Of course he does. Kings die. Armies retreat. Firewood still has to reach the hearth. You follow him for a few steps, remembering how heavy your first bundle felt. The staircase seems narrower now. Perhaps you have simply become less romantic about castles. A chamber is being cleaned. Rushes are gathered. Bedding is aired. A servant opens a shutter and allows cold evening air inside. Nothing about the activity would appear in a military chronicle. Yet these routines transform a fortress back into a home. You descend toward the kitchens. There, the smells are almost exactly as you remember them. Smoke, onion, bread, fat, warm grain. A cook leans over a pot. Another worker cuts vegetables. Someone complains about missing salt. You feel oddly relieved. During the siege, food became numbers, sacks, barrels, days remaining. Now a bowl can begin becoming merely supper again. Not completely. Stocks still need rebuilding. Supplies must be brought in. Merchants must return. Animals require fodder. The surrounding countryside needs time to recover from military disruption. But the calculation has changed. The kitchen is no longer asking only how long it can endure. It can think about tomorrow. You pass the well. A servant draws water. The rope creaks. The bucket rises. Water spills onto stone. You remember how much effort hid inside every cup, every wash basin, every pot of pottage. Dover's hidden life has always been measured in resisted motions. Pull, carry, pour, sweep, cut, stir, lift, repair, again. A fortress is built from repetition almost as much as stone. Near the stable, you find the boy who had been brushing the enormous horse. He is doing it again. The animal lowers its head as though nothing significant has happened. The boy works around its shoulder. War has apparently failed to impress the horse. That feels appropriate. Nearby, two children have returned to their stone game. One tosses a piece upward. Another tries to catch something from the ground before it falls. You still do not understand the rules. You suspect that even if they explained them, you would lose. A woman calls from a doorway and neither child responds. She calls again. They respond immediately. Some systems of command are more effective than military hierarchy. You continue toward the chapel. Candles burn inside. The soft light catches stone and timber. Someone kneels alone, perhaps giving thanks, perhaps mourning someone who will not return to the evening meal. Victory rarely distributes relief evenly. Some people inside Dover have lost companions. Some have injuries. Some have homes outside the walls that may have suffered damage. Some have spent weeks expecting death and now must learn how to sleep without listening for mining beneath the floor. The psychological aftermath cannot be measured in a medieval account. A clerk may record wages. He cannot easily record nightmares. You stand quietly near the entrance. Later generations will reconstruct the siege from chronicles, royal records, architecture, archaeology, and comparison with contemporary warfare. They will agree on the broad achievement. Dover resisted Louis, Hubert de Burgh became famous for holding it, but the closer anyone tries to move toward the texture of an individual day, the more certainty thins, which servant slept in which room. What did a child hear when the first missile struck? How often did a particular crossbowman stand watch? What jokes did the cooks tell? Who argued over the last good candle? Those answers are gone. That is not a failure of history. It is part of history. Most human lives leave fragments. You leave the chapel and climb toward the wall for the final time. The channel spreads beyond you. Evening light lies across the water. France is somewhere beyond the horizon. For generations, ships will continue crossing that narrow sea. Kings will come and go. Dover will be altered repeatedly. New defences will appear. Old ones will be rebuilt. The fortress will serve military purposes in conflicts unimaginable to anyone standing here in 1216. Some of the castle's later underground passages will become famous in entirely different wars. People centuries from now will walk through Dover carrying electric lights, wearing comfortable shoes, and complaining if the cafe closes early. The thought would probably confuse Hubert de Burgh. Perhaps the coffee would impress him. You rest your hands on the wall. Below. The repaired fortress settles into evening. Smoke rises from roofs. A gate closes. A dog barks. Someone laughs near the kitchens. A bell sounds from the chapel. And suddenly, the castle no longer seems primarily like a monument. You see the cook stirring his pot, the laundress lifting wet cloth, the porter with his keys, the groom carrying fodder, the crossbowman checking a string, the carpenter driving a peg into damaged timber, the miner crawling through darkness, the mother quieting a baby while stone trembles around her, the clerk counting grain, the child collecting abandoned gaming stones from the ward. These are the lives hidden inside the famous walls. The siege survives because chroniclers considered it important. The routines survive only when you choose to look for them. And perhaps that is what the stones remember best. Not one continuous heroic moment, but thousands of small acts performed by people who woke cold, became tired, worried about supper, complained about work, feared the enemy, laughed at ridiculous stories, and kept the fortress functioning anyway. You take one last look across Dover. The wind moves gently over the wall, far below. The road you climbed when you first arrived winds away through the darkening landscape. It is almost time to follow it home. The castle begins to recede behind you as you walk slowly down the hill. There is no need to hurry now. The gates are secure. The fires are burning quietly. The people you have followed through these long days are settling into their familiar places once more. Behind the stone walls, a cook covers a pot for the night. A groom gives one final glance toward the horses. A servant lowers a lamp. Somewhere in the keep, bedding is drawn closer against the cool air. The children who played in the ward are being called inside. Their stones can wait until morning. Above them, a guard continues his patient watch across the dark countryside. But even his footsteps seem softer now. The channel lies beyond the cliffs, broad and black beneath the night sky. A few distant lights may belong to ships moving through the darkness. France is still there. England is still divided. History has not suddenly become peaceful, but none of that needs your attention tonight. You have carried enough buckets, climbed enough stairs, listened to enough hammers, bells, crossbows, rumours, arguments, and creaking barrels. You can leave Dover to its watchmen as the road descends. The great keep slowly disappears behind the slope. First the lower walls vanish, then the towers. Finally only a dark outline remains against the sky. The wind becomes quieter, your footsteps slow. And the castle that once seemed so enormous becomes distant enough to hold gently in the imagination. You can remember its warm kitchens rather than its damaged walls, its candle-lit chapel rather than its alarms. the murmur of sleepy rooms rather than the crash of siege. Let those quieter sounds remain, a fire settling into embers, water moving deep inside a well, a horse breathing in the stable, soft footsteps crossing stone. They're nothing more than the wind over Dover's ancient hill. The road grows darker, the night feels calm, and you can finally rest. Sweet dreams.